Good morning, colleagues. My name is Deirdre Bartman. I am the chairperson of the Budget Committee. Given that there is a screen up in front of me and the mic is on the other side, and now I'm also wearing a mask, I'm just going to take my mask off so that everyone can hear me when I speak, because majority of our participants, which include members and the minister and the respective departmental officials, are both hybrid and virtual with us here today. Colleagues, today in Budget Committee, the main matters on the agenda is the briefing by Provincial Treasury on the Western Cape Third Adjustments Appropriation Bill 2020-2021 financial year as tabled in 2021, as well as the briefing by the Provincial Treasury on the Western Cape Appropriations Bill 2021. We will then go forward with the quarterly performance, which I will allow to be tabled with the third adjustments appropriations, just so that the respective financial year is covered at the same time. And we will then go further with the respective committee business after that. Colleagues, we will continue with the same formatting that we usually use. I will first allow for the presentations and then for questions and answers. And what I will do now is I will allow for the tabling of any apologies as well as the introduction of the members. And I will start as my name is Deirdre Bartman. I'm the chairperson of the Budget Committee, and all of our online rules apply. Procedural officer, you could just introduce yourself.
Good morning, I'm Wasima Ahmed.
Thank you. Members in the house, you could start.
Ricardo Mackenzie.
Thank you. Members virtually, you could introduce yourselves, please. Thank you.
Good morning, Chairperson Regan Allen. Good morning, Chairperson. I am Lulama Mvimbi.
Wendy Philander, good morning, Chair.
Daniel Smith, good morning. Good morning, Chair in the department, Masuli Kama.
Good morning, Chair.
Thank you. I heard those two members there.
Good morning, Chair. It's Member Nobin Kondlo.
Thank you. Welcome.
Morning, Chair and members. Cameron Dugmore.
Thank you. I still see one or two faces who haven't said hello yet. Okay,
Morning.
Patterson, aye.
Morning, Chair. Andrikus van der Westhuizen. Chair, may I just point out that your microphone is not as clear as what we were used to earlier during the session.
Thank you, no problem. Member Mackenzie is assisting me with a second mic. Members, I'll try to speak a little bit louder given the mics in the house are behind the protective COVID screens as well. So I will just attempt to use my primary school drama voice for projection. Minister and departmental officials, if you could just introduce yourselves on the record, please.
Hi, good morning, honourable members. My name is David Mania. I'm the Minister of Finance and Economic Opportunities.
Good morning, Chair, honourable members. David Savage, Head of Treasury.
Roy Hovman. Good morning, honourable members. I'm Roy Hovman, DG Fiscal and Economic Services.
Good morning, members. Good morning, Minister and Chairperson Chulinda Gantana, DDG Governance and Asset Management.
Good morning. I'm Paul Pina from the Provincial Treasury, Business Information and Data Management.
Thank you so much. Are there any officials online with us on the committee? Going once.
Good morning. Good morning, Chairperson, Annalise Pick, Public Finance.
Good morning, CFO.
Good morning, Chair. Karen van der Rede, Provincial Government Budget Office.
Good morning. Okay. Anyone else?
Good morning, Chair. Klaus Langenhoven, Provincial Treasury on the infrastructure side.
Good morning.
Good morning, Chair. Steve Kenyon from Local Government Public Finance.
Good morning. Okay. Members, before we jump into the presentation, for those in the house, your books are in front of you. For those online, your documents are in your inbox. So when you go to your emails, you open it and you will see that from papers we received the respective documents, and I'm sitting here with my email, my laptop in front of me, so I can confirm that this has been sent out and referred in terms of the ATC accordingly. Minister, I will now allow for introductory remarks if you so wish, as well as for the Provincial Treasury to jump into the presentations. And what I'll do is, can we please have the third adjustment with the quarterly performance, and then we will have the main one.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to be clear, do you want to deal with the budget first and then the quarterly performance?
Adjustment and the performance, and then we will do the main budget.
Okay. Happy with that? Good. Thank you, Chair. I don't think that it is necessary for me to make any opening comments. I've presented my speech and the budget for Hope a few moments ago, and I would like, through you, to hand over to the Head of Department, David Savage.
Thank you very much, Chair, members. If I could just ask my colleagues to put slide 48 up. Oh, they're not connected yet. Okay, so let me just talk to it, and I'll show the graphic a little bit later, because we're very aware that there is a large pile of documents either on your table or in your inbox, and it can be a little bit confusing as to what we are tabling here. So there's 7 documents in addition to the Minister's speech. There are 3 of those. I'm now starting to age, Chair, so I must just put my glasses on, excuse me. There are documents that relate specifically to the adjustments budget for the third adjustments budget for the 2020, the current financial year, and the remainder of the documents relate to the medium-term expenditure framework for the 2021 financial year, as starting on the 1st of April. And we'll come back just so that we're able to remind members of the sequence in terms of financial years and the relationship of the documents to parts of the discussion as a sort of reader's guide, because we're fully aware that we spend a lot of time poring over these documents, but members do not have that as much time available as we might. So I will start, Chair, with just the Q3 outcomes, spending performance for infrastructure and other expenditures for the 2021 financial year. So this is the quarter ending the 31st of December 2020, which is the third quarter of the current financial year. And as at, we do have slides in this respect, but I understand that we're having some technical difficulties still in loading the slides. So, with your permission, I'll just keep speaking to the data. We have reported provincial spending of 51.461 billion by the 31st of December, and that is 72% of the 71.5 billion rand adjusted budget. So 72% expenditures. There's net projected overspending of 135.465 million rand now for the entirety of 2021. That overspending is largely in health, which is related to, it's about 136 million, 283 million rand in health, which is related to both the maintenance of the health platform and the direct response to the COVID pandemic, and particularly the costs associated with the second wave. So goods and services pressures related to agency fees and metro health and rural district health services, some price increases on various chronic medication items, and the implementation and expansion of security contracts. Members will be aware there were some crime episodes at some primary health facilities, and some increases in payments on municipal services to in Tygerberg Hospital. Also spending pressures arising from the Brackengate Field Hospital, which is a pivotal facility in the overall provincial COVID response. So it's increased pressures for the hospital itself and related personnel contracts there. And these, of course, are very, very uncertain times, particularly for the Department of Health. So we have been expecting fluctuations in the pressures and rising pressures depending on the size of the second wave, and that's materialized, and it lays the basis for a third adjustments budget, which the Minister tabled today. There has been some minor underspending. The Provincial Treasury has been trying to lead the way in containing expenditure, particularly on compensation, and that's resulted in some small savings on the Provincial Treasury vote. The Human Settlements Department in this quarter is also under significant pressure to date. Due to reductions in the Human Settlements Development Grant, it's already spent nearly 93% of its appropriation. That's up to the end of December. There are, while we're not anticipating overspending, there is additional funding that has come through, as the Minister announced, to respond to the disasters in Masiphumelele and other areas, and a benefit from HSDG reallocations amongst provinces that's conducted at a national level. For public entities, as at 31 December 2020, total spending was 66.4% in relation to the adjusted budget, which is total spending of 522.177 million out of a total adjusted budget of 786.759 million. We're projecting underspending of 53 million, which really relates to three main entities. The Cape Nature, Western Cape Nature Conservation Board, it's currently spent 70.6% of its adjusted budget and is anticipating underspending of 28.8 million rand, mainly related to compensation of employees and about 10 million related to infrastructure projects. The Western Cape...
Apologies, I'm just standing up because I can't put the mic on from the other side. It seems the presentation is ready in terms of the technology now, so I'm just going to ask quickly that it is flighted so that we are also able to just follow the numbers.
Absolutely.
There we go.
Okay. Colleagues, if you could take it to slide 50 for me. 50. If I may continue then, so I'll just reverse slightly, Chair, so that members can catch up. Okay, excellent. So then if you could move this to slide 53, please, Paul. Where I was just talking about public entity expenditure up to 31 December, and I talked about Cape Nature. The other areas of underspending are the Gambling and Racing Board, projected underspending of 9.5 million, again driven largely by compensation of employees, but also some goods and services procurement delays. and Westgrow, the Western Cape Tourism Trade and Investment Promotion Agency, underspending of 7.771 million. And this is particularly due to the postponement of planned physical activities, physical engagement activities due to the pandemic. If we go to the next slide, which just looks at infrastructure expenditure, this is obviously something to watch very closely because it's easily disrupted by conditions such as the pandemic. The adjusted budget amount, infrastructure budget for the province in the current financial year amounts to 8.037 billion, of which by end of December, 72.8% had been expended, which is an amount of 5.852 billion. If we go to the next slide, please, with respect to our receipts are budgeted to, as adjusted in the second adjustments budget, to amount to 2.423 billion rand, of which we've collected 1.931 billion rand, or nearly 80%, by the 31st of December. Tax receipts come from gambling taxes and liquor license fees. The collected amount from gambling taxes is about 50%, just a little over 50% of the adjusted budget of a little under 600 million rand for the year. Liquor license fees, there's still no registered collections as yet. That tends to happen in the fourth quarter, the final quarter of the financial year. On the departmental revenue side, health own revenue amounts to 316.197 million, which is lower quite significantly than the 536 million rand collected by the same time last year. But that's attributed to the national lockdown, which has obviously resulted in the de-escalation of some health services and lower health patient fees, as well as disrupting health patient fees that are collected via the Road Accident Fund, and a decrease in the submission of medical scheme claims. The Department of Transport and Public Works recorded own revenue collections of 76.2% of the adjusted budget, mainly derived, of course, from motor vehicle license fees, which were remarkably stable, in fact, marginally up from the same period last year. And Department of Human Settlements own revenues of 102.9 million, which is an overcollection of 154%, but this mainly consists of returned subsidies from municipality and from municipalities and the sale of income from the sale of property assets. For non-financial performance, Chair, I will hand over to my colleague from Department of the Premier, Ms. Zinat Ismail, who's online. I hope. So I'll hand right over to her. Ms. Ismail.
Ms. Ismail, are you able to proceed?
Unmuted. Thank you. Can you hear me?
We can hear you. You may continue.
Okay. Thank you. I will be presenting the validated non-financial quarter 3 performance data. So next slide, please. Okay. So what we will be sharing with the committee today, it is looking at the performance data from two lenses. Firstly, it is a snapshot, and remind the committee that this is only a snapshot. It does not present a holistic overview of Western Cape government performance, only by looking at performance targets. But at least it presents a snapshot primarily on the overall performance in relation to the quarter 3 targets. In addition, what we have done, we keep track of all the interventions that Western Cape government have embarked on in terms of COVID-19, and we're also sharing a snapshot on the progress made on the implementation of COVID-19 intervention during quarters 1 and 2, and also showing the nuances for quarter three. Three important points I need to note. That the COVID-19 interventions was every quarter we have collected it via online survey, and the departments, all provincial government departments and the entities responded very positively towards this performance process that we have actually implemented to complement the usual electronic quarterly performance process. What we're also sharing with the committee, in alignment with the adjustment budget, we're also sharing the in-year changes to performance indicators for 2020-21, which means for this current financial year. Then moving forward, I need to kind of note here that the in-year changes to the performance indicators, as we know, during November 2020, provincial institutions were allowed to, they were allowed the opportunity, or they're given the opportunity to actually make changes to their performance indicators. So across the country, this provision were made. Some provinces opted to do it in June, July, and some provinces opted to do it in November. So having said that, it is just to give a kind of a snapshot or overview of a brief narrative of that in-year changes. One can see from a departmental perspective, out of 784 performance indicators, there were about 18% of those were actually requested for amendments, and that added to 141. And for public entities, a smaller amount because of the amount of indicators across the performance indicators across the public entities that are far less. 132 performance indicators. Out of that, only 19 was actually submitted for in-year changes. So the reason for that changes, the majority of the changes towards the adjustments of that indicator targets were for quarter three and quarter four. It means moving forward, quarter three at the time, moving forward to quarter four. And the reason for that, it is where department opted to, where a province or department opted to actually make changes in November at that particular time, then you could only make changes to a particular target moving forward and not reflecting back. So all in-year changes were formally tabled, and the electronic system that actually makes provision for the storing of the data and before it's being submitted to national, that was then also correctly updated. And we did that to ensure the relevance and the reliability of the performance data. Thank you. So if one go very briefly also into, so where do we stand in terms of our achievement against the against our performance indicator targets? As per usual, we have the departments, we have the 3 clusters, we have kind of grouped them into economic, social, and governance. And then the first column is about the number of performance indicator targets, and the rest it is then where we actually look at the nominal, in sense of nominal values, and the others in terms of percentage, in terms of what we have achieved. So traditionally, we actually talk about the number of targets achieved, partially achieved, and the number not achieved. So if one look at the bottom column, you can see in total 394 targets we had, 274 has been achieved, and then partially achieved about 82, and then number not achieved is about 38. And that translates into about 69% that we have achieved, 21% partially achieved, and that 10% that not achieved. So having said that, I want to just highlight a few, just a few of these departments. If one look at the governance, one can actually see that There's about 10% in local government that has not been achieved, and in the Department of the Premier, 9%, while in Treasury about 6%. But in the social sector, one could actually see that 25% linked to human settlement not being achieved, and community safety around about 18%. And then in the economic sector, it is the transport and public works, 32% not achieved, as well as 32% partially achieved, and then environmental affairs development planning about 20%. But I'll come later to actually the reasons, because this is just about whether you have achieved a target or not. There is a story behind this. And what's interesting to note, what is interesting to note in the next slide, it is across the Western Cape Government departments is 70% average across the departments. One look at that percentages achieved or not achieved. But interestingly to note, while we're standing at 70% now for quarter 3, where do we come from quarter 1? When we came to the committee in quarter to present the data for quarter 1, the Western Cape Government departments had an average of 46%, and that was when the pandemic hit us. In quarter 2, the performance of Western Cape Government progressed to, in terms of the departments, to 61%, and now we're standing at 70%. So this is comforting to note the progressive and the incremental increase in the average performance across the departments. A similar story can be narrated for the public entities, where in the first quarter, okay, I'll come back to the public entities. The next slide. Yeah. So before I run ahead for that comparative trends, let me move into the achievement against the performance indicator targets for the public entities. And as you very familiar with the different public entities, and we have grouped it also in terms of economic, social, and governance. One can see you can see that 55 of the number of performance targets, and the number of achieved about 51, and the number partially achieved about 5. And in essence, what we realize here, it is 77% of the target achieved, while 14% of the targets have not been achieved. When one look at the average in the next slide, and one see that 77% of the that the average of the performance across the public entities is 77%. A similar story can be narrated as I've done for the departments, and for quarter 1, 49% of the average was actually 49%. In the second quarter, it moved up to 63%, and now we're standing on 77%. So again, the performance across Western Cape Government have incrementally improved. Thank you. When one narrate the performance of what COVID-19 in terms of its intervention and what have happened, one can see that the survey that we have conducted on a quarterly basis, up to the third quarter, there were still new COVID-19 interventions implemented across the department. And having said that, when we came to the committee in quarter 1, the number of interventions that were implemented in quarter 1 was actually 86. It then dropped in quarter 2 to 15, because the bulk of the interventions for COVID-19 was done in quarter 1. And quarter 2, 15 new interventions. When we came to quarter 3, only 11 new interventions. So a decrease in the number of new interventions across the quarters, on C19 interventions. Thank you. And finally, the slide actually provides us with a progress on interventions implemented during quarters 1 and quarter 2. And one can see, as reported by the institutions, the above graph shows that about 49 or 44% of the interventions were completed in quarter 1 and 2, and 63 or 56% still continuing. So while there were 11 new interventions, about 56% of the other interventions that were implemented in quarter 1, the 86, in quarter 2, the 15, departments are still reporting progress on this intervention. It is noted that Provincial Treasury and the 3D public entities Saldanha Bay have completed the C19 interventions according to the progress reported to us. Thank you. Thank you. I'm handing over to HOD.
Thank you, Ms. Ishmael. Chair, that concludes the quarter 3 report as at 31st of December 2020. And to go into then which follows on from that, the third adjustments, the third adjusted estimates of provincial revenue and expenditure. If you're comfortable for us to proceed straight into that very briefly, I will ask Dr. Haverman to just quickly take us through the slides in that respect. The context here, of course, as I indicated at the beginning, is that this is a final budget adjustment for the 2020-21 financial year, this current financial year. Thank you, Dr. Haverman.
Thank you very much, Chair, and good morning again to everyone. Yes, just as the HOD indicated in the previous slides, there is obviously overspending on the health side, and there's obviously a lot of work that health is doing right now to prepare for the vaccination program and also ongoing COVID-19 expenditure. And for that reason, we have done an additional allocation of 116 million to health in this current financial year, which will ensure that they can meet all those requirements. In addition, we have done an allocation for on the Human Settlements Development Grant and the Provincial Emergency Housing Grant. That came from national, and that we've tried to allocate as quickly as possible in this third adjustments budget. And then as part of the process, we worked very closely with every single department to identify where they could surrender funds voluntarily and where they could find savings, because I think everybody shared the view that we should try and put as much forward for COVID-19, and so there has been some surrender of funds to the Provincial Revenue Fund at the end of the financial year. Usually that would be flagged as underspending, but in this case what we've done is we've done a sweeping of the votes, and that leads us to just some small changes. But I think most importantly, as highlighted in the red there, it does put us in a position to be able to allocate additional funds to health. Then on the following slide, that just does it by vote. Obviously, the larger votes surrendered more because they're larger. And then you can see there, particularly vote 6, as I said, gets an additional 116, and vote 8, human settlements, gets an additional 220. And then all the other votes have got small amounts of surrendering, all of which add up to the total. It's a very brief summary just of the third adjustments budget.
Thank you, Chair. I think the key point to note with the third adjustments budget is the virus, of course, does not respect financial years. Our biggest concern was that our health frontline may face cost pressures related to the switch over between financial years. At the moment, they're trying to gear up for the vaccination program, and so we worked with all the other votes to say, how do we maximize the support we can pre-position in this financial year? And if there needs to be, and we feel that it'll be possible to make a very strong case for rollover of the funds so that we just get uninterrupted spending across the financial years, and that just our administrative procedures do not end up being a problem. So we're comfortable that that's primarily what this adjustments budget allows us to achieve. Of course, it does also allow us to respond in the human settlements terrain and appropriate the additional funding for the response to the Masiphumelele disaster. Thank you.
Next presentation, because I suspect that some of the information in the main budget might also speak to questions that I'm sure members will have from the previous quarter, as well as the adjustment. And then I'll take questions and answers, but I completely agree. There are no such thing as calendar and financial years and deadlines when it comes to a virus within our global pandemic context. So let us jump into the next presentation, and then I'll take all of the questions at the same time.
Thank you, Chair. We will be a bit slower in this presentation because I think that this is the meat of the 2021 medium-term expenditure framework, and this is the slide, Chair, that I was referring to earlier around the very large package of documents that members have available to them. The 6 out of these 7 relate to the 2021-22 financial year and medium-term framework, which is the overview of provincial revenue and expenditure. That is the discursive book that members are accustomed to, that lays out the sort of broader policy and fiscal parameters of the budget. The thicker estimates of provincial revenue and expenditure, the doorstopper that members would be familiar with, provides the details of the individual votes across the province. That's complemented for the 3rd time now by the overview of provincial and municipal infrastructure investment, which is a focused look at the infrastructure programs of the province and how that relates to municipalities on a district and a local municipal level, and is a very detailed piece of important information that is tabled here. And then, of course, the 3rd adjusted, the gazettes and the appropriation bill that goes alongside that. If we can just go to the next slide, please. Thank you, Paul. I think I just wanted to underline the point that I left off on the other presentation, is the virus does not respect a financial year. Right early on, after tabling the 2020 MTEF, we acknowledged that, and we adopted a 3-phased budget process, and we've come back to the legislature twice before this. The first adjustments budget, and a second adjusted budget for the 2020 financial year, and our 3rd adjusted budget that positions us for the 2021 MTEF. That we've progressively responded in those budgets to immediate frontline needs, towards policy-based repositioning, and now towards our medium-term framework. So this has been a very conscious approach in terms of budget management, so that we're not trapped within the administrative confines of a calendar, but are able to be agile as the situation evolves around us, but importantly keep fiscal strategy in mind, so that we're able to stay the course for the long haul here. If we go to the next slide, the 2nd adjustments budget, to remind members, introduced a net reduction of 1.2 billion rand in expenditures due to national compensation downward adjustments. And members will remember at that time, which came with the tabling of the medium-term budget policy statement, the question of compensation of the employees and the funding around that was a critical issue that we were highlighting, and it had effects in the current financial year. Secondly, introduced initial funding around the Western Cape Recovery Plan and made sure that we remained prepared for COVID. Our third quarter performance, as we've just indicated to the committee, looks at the third quarter of this financial year to December, end of December, showing relatively resilient expenditure performance relative to the adjusted budget. And the third adjustments budget, as we've just tabled, is responding to those ancillary needs and is slightly more technical in nature. If we go to where we left off, though, which was with the 2020 medium-term budget policy statement, we'd estimated made preliminary estimates of expenditure for 2021 of 71.3 billion, 72.5 billion, 73 billion over the MTEF. There were significant changes that we were coping with at that time, including changes to the provincial equitable share, related predominantly to compensation reductions in various waves as they came onto the vote. But there were, as we pointed out at the time, non-compensation related adjustments related both to inflation adjustments, which are traditional in the system, and policy-related cuts, non-compensation related expenditure reductions to the equitable share, and then some adjustments as well that were anticipated because of demographic shifts that tend to benefit the Western Cape, given that we have an asset of a growing population. We made, at the time of the medium-term budget policy statement, a decision to set aside some of the reserves to be used for what we had identified at that point as a needed and important program of fiscal transition support as votes moved towards a lower baseline level of expenditures while trying to protect the quality of services and in some cases improve the quality of services they were providing. So we identified in that budget policy statement very significant risks related to compensation of employees and the outcome of the wage agreement, and the minister traversed those issues in fact today in his speech, as well as these significant ongoing uncertainties related to COVID-19 and its impact on the demand for government services, particularly those services in the health platform. Since then, if we go and now look just very briefly at the economic and fiscal context, the global and domestic economic outlook has continued to evolve in the estimations of varying analysts. The global economy is now expected to have contracted by 3.5% in 2020, but will rebound by 5.5% in 2021 and 4.2% in 2022. In South Africa, GDP declined by 7%. Now are the estimates in 2020, but is now anticipated to rebound by 3.3% and 2.3% in 21 and 2022 respectively. However, as we all know, our unemployment rate in South Africa has increased to 32.5% in the last quarter of 2020, and youth unemployment is now estimated to be at 46.1%, which is clearly a highly significant systemic challenge that we now face. Underpinning these figures of relatively steeper deterioration in South African growth rates and relatively more moderate rebound in growth rates are the underlying structural constraints to growth that we already knew about in the South African economy, issues like energy constraints, issues like policy uncertainty and what that does to investment outlooks. In the Western Cape, if we look at our specific Western Cape outlook, our economy is expected to contract by 6.4% in 2020, so slightly less dramatically than the national government, but dramatic nonetheless. It's expected to recover slightly more robustly, 4.6% in 2021 and 3.1% in 2022, when GDP could surpass 2019 levels. The recovery in the Western Cape appears, in accordance with our models, to be led by the trade and finance sectors, specifically a rebound in the tourism sector, as well as the impact of the recovery from the drought and the good agricultural season that we had in the last season. And if the recent rains are anything to go by, might carry through into the medium term, as well as the effects of successful implementation of the vaccination program. I should say, as I'm sure all members are probably thinking at the now, there are many uncertainties in those forecasts, and they'd be absolutely right. The success of vaccination programs in key tourism markets could make a real impact on tourism in the Western Cape. So there are many, many different moving parts here. These are, as with all models, informed, educated estimates of likely performance going forward. But we knew at the time of the MTBPS, the national MTBPS, that South Africa was facing a sharply weakened fiscal outlook. The national government has repeatedly highlighted a rising public debt overhang and debt servicing costs that are creating powerful negative fiscal dynamics over the medium to long term that need dramatic action to address them. The strategy adopted by national government in that respect has been a compensation of employees focused strategy, essentially in terms of wage freezes. That does translate through into significant cuts to provincial transfers, both in the current financial year, as mentioned previously, and in the 2021 MTEF. There are, for the province, reductions of over 18 billion rand in compensation of employees over the medium term, which build on the 2021 reductions that are already factored into our framework. But there are also non-compensation related fiscal reductions over the MTP fiscal consolidation over this medium-term framework of 3.2 billion rand. When we look very briefly, because this would be a session on its own, at the national government budget that was tabled by Minister Mboweni some 3 weeks ago, there's a reduced estimate of the tax shortfall by about 100 billion rand and spending cuts of about 265 billion rand over the medium-term framework. So the budget tabled at national level.
Apologies for interrupting HOD. I received some messages from members that they might be kicked out of the meeting at 12 o'clock due to load shedding that is occurring today. So I just wanted to table that apology from members in the event that that occurs. And I've also received message from another member that they'll be joining us at 12 because the load shedding more or less will end at that time. So colleagues, please bear with us today. I know it is difficult with ICT and digital and hybrid and everything, as well as with the load shedding impact, which is, I guess, is a little bit ironic given that it's budget day. But let us try and accommodate everyone this accordingly. And I'll just ask that the procedural officer just make note of those apologies as well. Thank you. You may continue.
Thank you, Chairperson. I was just indicating around the national budget. What that was tabled was a total of 2.02 trillion rand in consolidated spending in the next financial year, the bulk of which goes to learning and culture, about 56.8%, learning, culture, health and social development. But what's important to note in the national budget is the rising debt service costs that are consuming about 13.4% of total consolidated spending. In terms of the vertical division, and we will come back to this point, is the 48.7% of total consolidated spending is done by national government, 41.9% by provinces, and 9.4% by local government, which has, as members are aware, access to its own revenue sources. That spending after debt service costs, contingencies, and provisional and provisions. If we go to you have already gone to the next slide. tax revenue estimates are 213 billion rand lower than were projected at the same time last year. So members would have heard some media discussion around cash surpluses accruing at national level. That is somewhat a misreading of the situation. National government is facing sharply deteriorating revenues from the original fiscal framework and is having to accommodate that as well. But it has, with a relative rebound in revenue, managed to eliminate the previously proposed 40 billion rands worth of additional tax measures that had been penciled in at the time of the medium-term budget policy statement. And the consolidated deficit as a result of the reductions in spending is therefore narrowed to 6.3% of GDP in 23-24. So the important question here is, what, of course, does this mean for the province? Well, most importantly, on the long-term trend, the provincial equitable share is falling as a percentage of total national government spending. It's being squeezed out by other spending items. The provincial equitable share is our primary source of revenue as the province. It is also falling as a percentage of GDP in the country. And so that has very direct impacts on us as a province, and is perhaps the most important resource side equation for members to have a look at in understanding this budget. Our resource base is diminishing in real terms, while cost pressures are rising in real terms. And so in that context, as the minister had said in his speech, one has to do more with less. And how one then reaches that becomes the key challenge that frames, from a fiscal perspective, the strategy going forward. So what does this budget do in terms of fiscal strategy? Firstly, and probably most importantly, it protects the health platform. It enables the platform to remain agile and responsive to an evolving pandemic. But importantly, it resources rapid and effective vaccination rollout. Secondly, supports the Western Cape Recovery Plan and the priorities that have been determined for that around jobs, safety, and well-being, building on, importantly, the existing baselines that have been provided from the second adjustments budget onwards. And it funds SOPA commitments that have been made by the Premier. Thirdly, it manages ongoing risks. Because budgets are not just about more money across the board, particularly in an environment where there's less money. It's about managing actively risks that a diminishing resource envelopes poses to you. So it manages risks in terms of these ongoing reductions in national government expenditures. It manages risks on the local government side with public entities, governance risks that may emerge in the public entity space, which is always a risk for government, and Western Cape government has managed to navigate past those to date, but we would not want them to emerge during a period of distress. And it allows us to prepare for other disasters beyond COVID. We've seen the disaster in Masiphumelele. There have been the Knysna fires. There have been other disasters, and we need to remain prepared for that. And finally, and importantly, it supports a transition to longer-term sustainability for Western Cape government. It's not, with some of the compensation and other reductions that we were forced to absorb in the short term, it was just simply not possible for votes such as education or health to adjust their service delivery platforms overnight. So we have smoothed the effects of some of those reductions to allow the leadership and the staff of those departments to manage a transition to a new baseline. Secondly, we funded new ways of delivering services, new delivery models, such as the chronic medication delivery service, and supporting the development of new ways of work, which has been so fundamentally part of the COVID experience as we've all moved online. We've taken measures to rebuild reserves, to actively manage compensation of employee costs over time, and to strengthen our own revenue collection, which has taken a serious hit as a result of lockdown measures. But these fiscal pressures that we're facing are resulting in major transversal risks for the province. The key risk, I'm sure everyone is aware, is COVID-19 itself and its economic and social implications. But there are risks that are arising from compensation of employees, which are a significant portion of total provincial government expenditures. And if we are unable to fill certain critical posts, we place added pressure on existing personnel, including those at the front line of our response to COVID-19, and there are real risks of burnout, exhaustion, depletion amongst those healthcare workers and others. There is a risk that we invest insufficiently in our asset base, in both the maintenance and the creation of new assets, infrastructure assets for the province that constrain service delivery, both now but also into the future. These are the platforms from which we deliver our services. And finally, there are risks of deterioration in local government finances, both due to the direct pressures they're facing as a result of the pandemic, but also some of the instability that may arise from the forthcoming local government elections. So while there are significant risks and uncertainties that remain, it's contingent on the budget to respond to them within the resources that it has available. The response of this budget is manifold, manyfold. There will be, and we will talk through some of the elements of this in more detail as we go through the budget. But I thought it opportune just at this point to highlight some of the main initiatives from a fiscal perspective. The first is an investment in high quality infrastructure project pipeline preparation and portfolio management. There are a lot of opportunities to leverage provincial assets, to invest in infrastructure in ways that can start to leverage private financing. But private financing, whichever way you look at it, requires a line of sight through to the investment portfolio itself, and that is what we are looking to support the development of, as mentioned by the Minister. Secondly, in supporting fiscal transitions, we understand that all of our votes need to look for cheaper ways of doing things better. And that is sometimes comes with upfront costs that can prevent that transition from occurring and therefore prevent the longer term sustained savings from being achieved. Thirdly, we need to double down in terms of our engagements with municipalities over their management of municipal finances. That's not just in an oversight role, but it's in a partnership role with municipalities as they seek to navigate very, very uncertain terrain. Fourthly, we think that there are enormous opportunities associated with the fiscal transition for the introduction of artificial intelligence and machine learning, not only in how we are making digital services available to citizens, but how we're conducting our own work as government. And there are various initiatives that are underway. Fifthly, there is a bespoke strategy that is in an advanced stage of preparation around compensation of employees. There's also been a detailed initial review on public entity governance, and there is a full-scale review that is planned for the current financial year. There are initiatives to enhance public participation, particularly at local government level in the lead up to the local government elections and beyond. There are initiatives around supply chain management aimed at executing our overall provincial supply chain management strategy and building the digital platforms on which we think, where we think the future of efficient and effective supply chain management is to be found. And finally, as announced by the Minister, a project on the fiscal future, modelling the fiscal future of the Western Cape government is also being initiated. We do think going forward and building on that last point, that there are significant opportunities for budget repositioning that still are available to us as the Western Cape government in terms of compensation containment of compensation costs, and staff productivity strategies, in terms of streamlining and coordinating functions across provincial departments and entities, in terms of a broader SCM reform program, which is a sequenced program of reforms to enhance value for money in our procurement, and in terms of streamlining intergovernmental functional assignments and relationships, both with national government and with our municipal partners in the province. There are some key issues here, though, because one would obviously want to exploit all of these as soon as you can, but sequencing is critical. First and foremost, and where we have to make sure we get it right, is in responding to the pandemic and dealing with those cost pressures, because vaccinations are central to recovery, and that recovery is central to our long-term fiscal health. We do need to move beyond commitments to restoring fiscal sustainability to the actual measures that achieve that within this medium-term expenditure framework. So within that context, I will hand over to my colleague, Ms. Annelies Pick, to talk through the fiscal framework and response in more detail, then to Dr. Roy Haverman to talk around priority spending areas, and Ms. Taryn van der Rede, I think, will assist in that part, and I will come back at the end, Chair. Annelies? Oh, I can see you, but I think you're on mute still.
Yes, thank you, HOD. Thank you, Chairperson, and good afternoon to the members. So firstly, what we are starting off is to look at the 2021 MTEF fiscal framework. And then this slide has two purposes. Number one, it provides you with the 2021 MTEF fiscal framework, but it also compares that fiscal framework to the 2020 MTF, meaning the indicative allocations that when we tabled last year's budget, and it compares it therefore to last year's budget at the same time. So let's first kick off with the 2021 MTEF fiscal framework. And as you'll see in terms of the sources on the left-hand side of the table, that then indicates to you, first of all, the revenue of our fiscal framework. That revenue comes to a total in the middle, and in the middle column for the 2021 MTF to just under 71 billion rand. It then further gives you the different key revenue sources, and I will come back to this in detail in the following slides. It then indicates to you the total expenditure, and for the first year of the MTF, you'll see our total expenditure is just under 72.4 billion rand. That already says that we are spending more in our expenditure than our total revenue envelope. Further, in terms of reserves, that we are also making allowances for, in the 2021 financial year, that reserves amount to 1.2 billion rand. And then it gives us, therefore, a deficit on our budget of about 2.6 billion rand. That 2.6 billion rand is then financed through the Provincial Revenue Fund. And as you can see, from our asset financing reserve as well as the Provincial Revenue Fund to the value of 2.6 billion rand, which then gives us a total and balanced budget. For the same, each of those financial years, in the second year of the MTF, you'll see that our revenue amounts to 71.4 billion rand, of which our expenditure is 72.6 billion rand. The reserves that we've allowed for is 419 million rand, with the difference coming funding about 1.6 billion from the Provincial Revenue Fund, essentially, and exactly the same for the third financial year. So that then gives you an idea in terms of the 2021 fiscal framework for each of the financial years of the MTF. Now, when we compare though, sorry, if you could go back. Now, when we compare that fiscal framework, so the 2021 MTF numbers that we are tabling with you today, we compare those numbers to what we tabled as indicative in the previous financial year. You'll see, therefore, that from a total revenue perspective, it is 26 billion rand less revenue than what we anticipated for. And that is mainly in terms of fiscal consolidation that we needed to do from a national level. And most of that is coming from compensation of employees. Then our total expenditure then reduces by about 16.3 billion rand. The minister in his speech has indicated that we had to then also look at our reserves that we then tabled last year, and we then also then drew down from those reserves a total of 6.5 billion rand. And then, as I indicated before, the difference then comes from financing from our provincial revenue fund. So you can see in terms of for departments that they needed to reduce their baselines over the MTF. So when we look at that total revenue reduction and where it comes from, that will come now in the following slides in each of the key areas of our revenue. So when we look at the first in terms of key area, and that is our provincial equitable share, which is the majority of our revenue, you'll see then the changes here that is indicated per year over the MTF. So as we started out, we were indicating almost a equitable share totaling about 188 million rand. We've had changes, 188 billion rand, so sorry. And we had changes over the MTF with a reduction of around 23 billion rand, which mainly consists of the compensation of employees, and that is in terms of the wage freeze in terms of the 2018 wage agreement. So you can see that amounted to about 13.5 billion rand. We also then had a further reduction for consolidation on COE for the new wage agreement, which will then commence in terms of negotiation in this financial year. There's a reduction of 10.2 billion rand there. And then finally, at the end of this budget process, because National has also reduced our conditional grants, which is the next slide to come, but because National has also reduced our conditional grants, and within conditional grants, there is a COE component. National then has realized that there was some double counting in the reductions and therefore reversed some of the COE reductions to the value of about 400 million over the MTF. We had some additions to the equitable share, and that is in terms of our response to COVID-19 of about 832 million rand in the first year of the MTF, and then also indicated in the budget speech is in terms of our update of the equitable share formula, and this is in terms of the new data that has been put into the formula, and therefore that has then given this province about 1.6 billion rand over the MTF, an increase. Largely, there was also a correction by National Treasury to the value of just over 230 million rand. So then that actually then all in all, the total changes then, if we look at that, we started out expecting 188 million rand in equitable share over the 2021 MTF. We've ended up though with an equitable share totaling 164 million rand. So that then indicates in terms of how the equitable share has changed over the MTF. Now when we look at the conditional grants, and this is rather a small slide, and I apologize in terms of for some of the small figures, but the conditional grant, this slide, it gives you in terms of very similarly to the first slide, it shows you in terms of in the middle column for each of the financial years, it shows you the allocation for each of those conditional grants, and then it also compares those conditional grants to the previous indicative allocation indicated to departments by the various national sectors. So when we first look at the first set of grants, which is your education grants, Now, essentially, there we have minuses and we have pluses, so increases and decreases for conditional grants, but in most in terms of the education has a net increase of the grant, and that is mainly, if you look at that, that is mainly in terms of the infrastructure grant, which has an increase of about 60 million rand. So there's a net surplus in terms of for conditional grants for education. When we look at the health conditional grants, and this is a sector that has had really the brunt of the reductions that you saw for conditional grants overall. So overall, there is about a 1.6 billion rand reduction for conditional grants. But of that 1.6 billion rand reduction, the majority of that occurs within the health sector. And within the health sector alone, that sector and that department then has a reduction on its conditional grants of about 1.8 billion rand. And the majority of that 1.8 billion rand reduction is in the National Tertiary Services grant. Now, this is a grant where it is in terms of, it funds in terms of services at the tertiary platform, for example, Grooteskier, Tygerberg, and so it is really our teaching hospitals and where in terms of most of our specialists occur. So this kind of reduction has a huge implication on the service platform for health, and therefore put health even more under pressure besides the COVID-19 response. The next slide, and the next slide then indicates to you, when we look at human settlements, there is very little change over the MTEF with the HSDG grant. That is some good news considering the pressure that we're facing in the current financial year, but there has also been in terms of some changes in terms of the grant framework where the HSDG grant is concerned. When we look at the transport and public works, there has been a net increase on this grant, and that is mainly because of the incentive portion of the infrastructure grant that has been put into the MTEF. Then lastly, in terms of your agriculture grant, there is a slight reduction, and this reduction is mainly within the CASP grant. And lastly, in terms of our cultural affairs and sport grants, the major loss here that we have is on the library services grant, and you'll see that that is in terms of over 50 million reduction over the MTF. So as I indicated, all in all, there are increases, there are decreases on the conditional grants, but in total, we then are reducing conditional grants by the value of 1.6 billion rand. Then when we're moving along to our third category of revenue, and this is looking now at our Provincial Revenue Fund tax receipts, which consists of the casino and horse racing taxes, and then also the liquor licenses fees. So when you look at the changes that we see over the MTEF, there is a reduction just over over 500 million rand for this grant, and it's for these taxes, sorry. And the reduction is mainly on the casino and horse racing taxes. And the main reason for this is in terms of in order to mitigate risk to the fiscal framework, and also in terms of for the projections of a conservative approach in terms of the impact that online gambling could have for the industry. Lastly, also then just to indicate that these two taxes are received as conduits via the Provincial Treasury and the Department of Community Safety for the gambling and liquor licenses into the Provincial Revenue Fund. Then on the last key area on the revenue side is changes to our own revenue. And the total change for the revenue over the MTF, you'll see, is just over 372 million rand. The majority of that reduction is within the health space. And that is our hospital patient fees. And you'll see that of the 372 million reduction over the MTF, 362 million of that comes from the Department of Health reducing its health patient fees projection. And that is mainly in terms of the impact that COVID would have in terms of the population that they are servicing in terms of in terms of their different service platforms, but also in terms of the fact that the impact on the road accident fund for the Department of Health. So in terms of, again, for risk mitigation for health, they have decided to reduce their revenue in terms of going forward over the MTF. If any of the assumptions do change, then they would then change also their revenue projections for the MTF as we progress the budget process. Then moving along then now to the next part, and that is in terms of the response now from a spending priority for this budget.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'll do this one quickly. If I could just go on to the following slide, just to quickly talk to the numbers, and then I'll come back to explaining them. So one slide ahead. Perfect. Thank you very much. So yes, as the Minister said in the speech, what we've done is we've found a sort of a COVID-19 war chest of 2.173 billion, and that's that number in the bottom right-hand corner of the slide. And just to highlight how we've thought through this and how we've come to that number. So the first component is, like I said, in the third adjustments bucket, is we've basically swept as much money as possible, because as the HOD put very well, the virus doesn't really worry about financial years. So the first component is that 116 million that comes in the third adjustments budget. The second component is an amount that is set aside in this coming financial year in 21-22, which is that bottom number there, 1.963 billion. And I'll explain briefly how that's all made up. And then the third component is an amount that we've set aside in 22-23, which is mainly if there are any additional vaccinations that have to take place there. If you look at how that 1963 is made up, you'll see that the top, if you go to the top of that column, the 21-22 column, there's an amount set aside, which I think is quite important, for the communication program, because accompanying the vaccination program, we'll have to spend quite a lot of money on communication, a big campaign to get people, to encourage them to be vaccinated. And that money goes to the Department of Premier, because they've been leading on all the COVID-19 communication. And they get 20 million for that, and then 5 million for a contact center. And then on the Department of Health vote, obviously that first amount is from the previous financial year. The second amount, the 832085, that is an amount that we've received from National to support any potential third wave costs. T-Timber, when he put aside 8 billion, of which we get 832 million. Then the bottom, so just skip the 150, the bottom 156,690 is an amount that we've got from National for conditional grants. So that's what we got from National. We then did an analysis with the Department of Health of what we thought we would need to roll out a successful vaccination program. They have not allocated any money for us for communication. They have not allocated any money for us that we could see, or sufficient money for us for things like cold storage, a lot of the costs around the sort of staffing costs that we need, et cetera, et cetera. And so in our estimation at this stage, we need at least 75 million additional resources to support the operationalization of the COVID-19 vaccinations. In addition, there is a likelihood that the vaccine program will be delayed quite significantly. We're still waiting to hear all the, and I think the Minister put out in his speech, all the different moving parts on the risks from the vaccination program. And so we've thought to put aside at least enough money for a Johnson & Johnson one-shot vaccine that will cover at least all the people that are over 65 in the province. And so if it does get to the point that we would have to acquire vaccines, that's sort of the amount of money that we have available. Over and above all of that, there's an 800 million amount that has been put in the reserves that we can draw on if there are more vaccines that need to be bought, or if there's a third or fourth wave, and so forth. And the slide, if you just go up one poll, that sort of tries to summarize all the things I've just said. Just briefly, that there's this 156 in conditional grants and 832. So that second bullet is what National has allocated to us. And then because of the extensive uncertainties, we've put aside an additional 150 million, of which 75 is possible vaccines acquisition, which is enough for 500,000 people, or at least all those in the Western Cape over 65 years old. And then finally, there's an 800 million that is ring-fenced in a COVID-19 reserve, which would cover any eventuality. I mean, I wish I could tell you that there wouldn't need to be spent. I wish we'd know exactly what the nature of COVID-19 would be in this coming financial year. But this should be sufficient to cover almost all eventualities. Then going on to the fiscal transition support facility allocations. As the HOD said, it's quite important for us to look at new ways of delivering services, particularly as costs are going up and our revenues are coming down. And there have been some very exciting proposals from departments, very innovative, forward-looking ideas. And I won't go through all of them in detail, just to highlight one of them, which is that the Department of Health has found during the COVID-19 crisis that actually it is cheaper and more efficient and better for everyone if vaccines are delivered to people's homes. Not vaccines, but medication, chronic medication is delivered to people's homes. This encourages people to actually use the chronic medication. People don't have to go to their hospitals, which means you actually can run much smaller hospitals. You don't need to have big facilities. And this, we think, will cost about 33 million a year to roll out. But over the long run, that'll save costs, and I think would be better for everyone. And then related to that is telehealth. I won't go into all the detail of those, but we can have questions on those. And then on the following slide, these are all the additions to the baselines. These are just additions that the votes have gone through. I won't go line by line, just to highlight that there are a variety of different things that have been added to votes. Things like cybersecurity and infrastructure refresh for vote 1, which is Department of the Premier, and that's all the security that has to happen online. There's a VAT issue there. The Provincial Treasury will be rolling out expenditure reviews, so there's a little bit of money allocated for that. Most importantly, and this the Minister did also cover in the speech on vote 6, which is the health vote, is that there is a huge pressure on the vote over the next 3 years because of all the cuts that have come from national. And so we have found about 500 million a year rising to 600 million over the long run. And then I'll talk through there is a slide on project preparation. And then my colleague will come in a little bit later, specifically around the recovery plan. So, as we're trying to get through this COVID-19 crisis, there is also the need to have a comprehensive economic recovery plan and to deal with really specific issues that are arising. And there, I think the Minister also covered this in the speech. What we are putting aside is 25 million to discover any food event. It might well be that if there's another significant COVID wave and we have a very hard lockdown, that the Department of Social Development will need to spend money on food relief again. So we've allocated 25 million upfront, but also an additional 25 million in reserve that can be drawn on. There's also an amount for increased support to families for COVID-19, gender-based violence, etc., of 10 million. We've allocated money for Blue Dot, which is an initiative from the Department of Transport and Public Works to improve public transport. There's also money for the Targeted Public Employment Program, and then money to municipalities to strengthen public participation and citizen-focused interventions. That vote 14 there is Department of Local Government. So that is targeted employment programs in municipalities. And we'll go into a lot more detail on the recovery plan in a moment. So just to pick up again, I think I've spoken to this, but just to highlight how important this is that vulnerable communities in targeted local areas may face periods of elevated distress. We definitely saw that in the last financial year. Obviously, there are lots of people that are at risk of sort of severe issues if there's a hard lockdown. As we know, a lot of the support from national has been stopped, and so there are big risks available there. And so, as I've indicated, we have set aside 100 million, of which food relief is 25 and 25 held in reserve. I think I've spoken to these already. So then just to go through the items by vote, the large reductions here all relate to what my colleague Ms. Pick explained, which is that National has reduced the compensation budgets quite significantly. If you do these calculations between the M2PS and the budget, you'll see that almost all the votes get increases. This does it from a budget to budget perspective. But I think it's very important to highlight, I think as was highlighted by Ms. Pick and by the Minister in his speech, that there are obviously large reductions from National over the MTF. And this does it on a vote by vote basis. What we really try to do as far as possible in both the M2VS and in the budget process is to protect key provincial responsibilities, particularly education and health. On the following slide, we just do the analysis of the share of the spending by economic classification, and that just shows that over the long run, the share stays basically the same, mainly in the area of compensation. And that is partly because a lot of the services that we provide are very compensation heavy. Obviously, education requires lots of teachers, and health requires lots of doctors and nurses. But this is a big area of pressure for us going forward, particularly if wages continue to rise. And then on the following slide, what we've done, and there's a whole chapter on it in the overview of provincial revenue expenditure, and it's really worth reading it, because what we've tried to do is try and identify how the money that is spent by the province is spent across the province. So to try and give an indication of the spatial distribution of spending throughout the province. And particularly because different parts of the province are growing at different rates. We did a lot of, I think we did present on the Municipal Economic Review and Outlook document, and we'll do that again, the updated one, obviously later in the year. But it's really interesting how different parts of the province are growing at different rates, both from a population perspective and from a growth perspective. And this puts a lot of pressure on us. So the Department of Education has a whole plan about how they're trying to make sure that they build schools in areas where there's population growth, and perhaps reduce the amount of schools or learner places in areas where population growth is negative. And so understanding these provincial dynamics is very important. And then on the following slide, I'm hoping this then does an analysis of the transfer to municipalities on a vote-by-vote level. So trying to understand how we distribute money to municipalities. The big items there are obviously human settlements, which does a lot of very close work with different municipalities on delivering human settlements. The next largest one is health, mainly because they do transfers to the City of Cape Town for primary health care, and then some transfers from Transport and Public Works, where they work closely with municipalities to deliver roads, and then Cultural Affairs and Sports, which is libraries. And then, as I indicated, one of the big areas of the budget is obviously the Western Cape Recovery Plan. I'm hoping my colleague Taryn van der Rede is, I know she's in the middle of load shedding. I hope she can join us. Otherwise, I'll talk through those items.
Thank you, Dr. Haberman. So the 2021 budget really responds directly to the Western Cape Recovery Plan. Just as additional context, the 2019 to 2024 PSP remains the guiding document for the Western Cape, while the recovery plan really prioritizes those interventions of the PSP that will support recovery. So the recovery plan really provides a clear plan for COVID-19 recovery, building on 4 themes: COVID-19 response, jobs, safety, and well-being, with the overarching objective of enabling residents of the Western Cape to live dignified lives. Next slide, please. So this slide just provides you with an overview of the budget spending plans and priorities over the 2021 MTEF, We'll kick off with the COVID-19 recovery, which includes scaling up the health platform capacity to manage COVID-19. And here we're really looking at the continuation of Brackengate as well as Saunstraal, really to ensure that we are prepared for the potential third and fourth wave. Also included is the COVID-19 vaccine rollout, which has been spoken to by Dr. Haberman. We are also looking at how we enable safer choices through behavioral change and our effective communication strategy. And then also our employee health and wellness program, which really looks at how we better support employees within the Western Cape government impacted by COVID-19 and also providing them with the required counselling. Then with regards to jobs, it's about enhancing the ease of doing business. And as part of this is also including the red tape reduction as well as support to SMMEs, accelerating infrastructure investment, which is really about how we better invest in a robust infrastructure pipeline. Infrastructure investment also includes the social as well as economic infrastructure interventions. And then very important is also scaling up work opportunities. And this also links to the public employment programs. Then with regards to safety, it's really about how we give effect to our safety plan. Also linked to this is how we take an evidence-based approach to our safety plan, and here really targeting our hotspot safety interventions and areas, and then also upscaling gender-based violence interventions. Then with regards to well-being, it's about humanitarian relief, but also including food relief, how we upscale ECD initiatives, and then a lot of well-being is also linked to the work done in the education space, which speaks to improved learner outcomes and e-learning, and also to the health space, which speaks to innovative healthcare. Then our enablers overall underpins the Western Cape Recovery Plan, and the interventions included here is about driving innovation, digitization, new capabilities, and a new normal culture, which is really supported by our new way of work, which is being led by the Department of the Premier. Next slide, please. So this slide just provides you with an overview of the recovery plan priority areas over the 2021 MTEP. What you will see is that well-being accounts for the greatest portion of the budget, followed by jobs, then safety, and then COVID-19. But also important for you to note is that quite a bit of the indirect interventions linked by COVID-19 is also linked to the well-being. Thank you. I'll hand back to Dr. Haberman on infrastructure.
Thank you very much. So, put a lot of documents, but one of the documents that we put out is this overview of municipal infrastructure investment, which tries to summarize all the different infrastructure projects taking place in the province. It also does a very nice summary of infrastructure by different municipalities. And then this here, what we've done is just summarized the top 10 infrastructure projects in the province across the different areas, highlighting that a lot of money is obviously being spent on education, on scheduled maintenance, transport and public works, human settlements, and so forth. On the following slide, we just provide a summary of the infrastructure spending per department, education, health, social development, etc. And highlighting the fact that obviously the largest spending item is human settlements, followed very closely by education and then health. On the following slide, this does a summary, as I said, of the spatial distribution of planned infrastructure, and there is a whole analysis breaking down about where we have spent money. Very importantly, the big push to make sure that we spend money throughout the province, and that particularly, as I indicated, the fastest growing parts of the province get the largest amount of spending. Then the following slide does a breakdown of infrastructure spending as a percentage of the total. This obviously breaks down things into upgrading and additions, rehabilitations, renovations, non-infrastructure, new or replaced infrastructure, maintenance and repairs, and infrastructure transfers on capital. Great. And then I think hand back to the HOD for the remaining risks and pressures.
Thank you very much, to the team. Yes, I think just in concluding then, Chair, just to note that we are still in an environment that's both volatile and uncertain going forward. There are, in our estimation, significant downside risks over this next medium-term expenditure framework. Should national government's debt management strategy not unfold as materialized, particularly in relation to wage agreements and so forth, there might be further disruptions to our budget. And I think that this emphasizes for us in the Provincial Treasury the need for us to take a medium to long-term view on fiscal sustainability, and hence our initiative to start modeling fiscal futures beyond the 3-year expenditure horizon that is the current framework. There are also, as I think everyone knows, significant COVID-19 related uncertainties over the medium term in terms of what are the costs of containment, or estimates of the costs of a single wave of the pandemic running at around R1 billion per wave, but there are uncertainties that remain around vaccination rollout costs, time frames, and broader social economic impacts of the pandemic as well. We have tried to obviously respond to all of this, as we've noted, in terms of how we have positioned resources, both in terms of the formal appropriations and reserves that are available. There are also downside risks related to aging infrastructure and infrastructure backlogs in the province that impact not just on our immediate service delivery, but on eventually the long-run growth potential of the regional economy. And we've in this budget emphasized the importance of really developing that pipeline of projects that we can start to apply alternative financing instruments towards where appropriate. There are also human resources risks related to compensation budgets and the final outcome of the wage agreement, but also the risks that our existing personnel are placed under extreme pressure and leave the system. The fatigue, employee well-being are issues that are deeply concerning to us, particularly for our frontline staff that have been working tirelessly in relation to the pandemic, and that ultimately productivity is diminished. And then finally, there are some specific vote-specific pressures that we have highlighted. I think health has been talked about in some length in this presentation. There are specific pressures that we've responded to in Department of Human Settlements as well. And there are an ongoing set of pressures in the ICT infrastructure environment as well. So which are important to address sustainably, because that digitization of government services is a key part of the future, and I think it's really a transversal issue that crops up across all of the discussion here today. So these pressures on the fiscus are going to persist. And it really does emphasize the need for us to pursue not just new ways of work, but the fiscal mechanisms we can use to support that way of work through the introduction of new ways of work through the fiscal transition support that we are providing. It requires us to relook at how we organize and structure government, both within the provincial government and across the spheres of government, to make sure that we're maximizing citizen impact and value for money. It requires that we do continue to implement and in fact enhance our compensation and staff productivity strategies. And it requires that we continue to keep a close eye in terms of developments in our local government and public entities space, enabling where we can municipalities to do the right thing. And we've included, I think, discussion on this in the budget documentation. There's, for example, I think a very nice text box discussion on some of the municipal finance challenges that adds some more to that. And finally, I think we have to all acknowledge that the development challenges and our response to the pandemic are not solved by money alone. and our recovery are not solved by money alone. There are resources are an input that are converted through human effort, through the policy choices we make, into outputs and outcomes that we want. And there are a series of non-fiscal measures that are not resource-intensive measures, for example, in the regulatory environment and the ease of doing business, that are really critical complements to whatever we can hope to accomplish in this budget. I think in closing, let me just say two things. I think from the provincial treasury side, we can see in this 21 MTEF the dawning of a new way of work in government, and it's something that we can see as essential, and I think most financial managers across government can see as absolutely essential now. And I think we need to guard against a slide back into what we regarded as the old normal, the original ways of doing business, with the costs that were embedded there. And the outcomes that were embedded there. Secondly, I think just in closing, we know that we have put together a voluminous pack of documents that we really do construct from the get-go with an intent of making the difficult challenges we face, but also the complexities of public financial management as easy to understand as possible. We've put particular effort this year into our writing style so that it's more accessible to a broader group of readers. We've tried to provide, even in this presentation, various slices through the budget. So we do hope that these are useful documents for the committee members. As we said last year, we live, our lifeblood is the feedback that we get on how valuable they are and what more we can do to assist the legislature in its oversight responsibilities. But it would be remiss of me to not end by thanking very much my colleagues, not just in other departments, but specifically in the Provincial Treasury. The team has worked some very, very late nights right through this year. The Director General was commenting to us this morning that he says this is the 5th budget we're tabling this year. And it's been an enormous effort and required a lot of joined up action. Obviously, the budget team in the Treasury gets a lot of recognition, as is their due at this time. But I also wanted to specifically mention the work of our team led by Ms. Gantana on the governance and asset management side, because what ultimately matters is how we manage public expenditure through the cycle, of which budgets is one, expenditure execution is another, and oversight is the other. So it really has been a joined up group effort, and I'm deeply appreciative of my colleagues' long hours in that respect. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and thank you for the presentations. Colleagues, given that we have been sitting for almost 2 hours, I'm going to allow for a quick 10-minute comfort break. So you can make yourself a cup of coffee, you stretch your legs, and then we will resume within 10 minutes. Thank you. Okay, welcome back, colleagues, online and or virtual and in the chamber. We're going to now continue. We've had all of the respective presentations. I apologize for standing up. I'm just trying to ensure that all the technological logistics are able to assist with my projecting of voice. So colleagues, I'm going to take questions now. I'm going to do one round and then answers and then another round. So please indicate. What I'm going to do is I'll start with the chamber, and my procedural officer for us, for budget committee, is going to indicate who has their hands up virtually, just so that I don't miss anyone specifically. So I'll start with the chamber. Member Mackenzie.
Thank you,
Before you
Chairperson.
speak, Member Mackenzie, I just want to see if there are anyone with virtual hands that are up so long, so I can just get our lineup. Okay, there are none yet. So Member Mackenzie, you may go ahead, and then I'll check afterwards again.
Thank you, Chair. The budget is so good, there are no questions. Thank you, Chairperson. Thank you to the Minister and the officials from Treasury. Indeed, the budget for hope, and unfortunately, we know the constraints that has forced some of the decision-making that we are here, but we are here, and we are the government of the day, and the government has to provide hope, which indeed this budget is. Minister, if I can just come back to your speech first, and obviously guided by the 3 North Stars, job, safety, and well-being, as you said. When we look at one always appreciate the allocation to humanitarian relief, but one of the things that I picked up that always become, in my opinion, is call it the missing middle or the new poor. And has there been consideration of this reallocation and the 25 million for food relief? Has there been thinking from Treasury perspective as how do we and one will get to the departments in their own budget vote and how they're going to do it. But I'm just trying to get an understanding from Treasury's perspective, Chairperson. Has there been thinking about how the departments can assist the new poor, the missing middle, if you like, if they want to call him? Because it's easy to identify somebody that needs a food parcel. It's easy to identify somebody that needs a food grant, but it's difficult to identify individuals that has lost their jobs, or that one partner's lost their funding or lost their money due to jobs being retrenched. And has there been guidelines or consideration from Provincial Treasury as how departments can aid individuals in that perspective, or any perspective? Not the 350 grant, not the one that needs a food parcel. We know what social development is going to do. But has there been any technical considerations from the department as to how we can consider assisting those individuals? I just wanted to hear from the department. The second question is on the allocation of the vaccines, and I'm sure from the department side, when we get to them, Chairperson, they'll give us the how. But has the Treasury been, or now that the money is being made available, 75 million I can see, and all the communications money that we spend, has there discussions been taking place around how we're going to procure this vaccine? Is Treasury going to do it? Is the Ministry of Health going to do it? And on the 500,000 rand, 500,000 units, the single jab, by when, if I may ask? Because obviously this now we'll be going in the financial year. People are waiting to hear what's happening. And I mean, and I can understand where you're coming from. I mean, we've seen what's happening. I saw the other day on a tweet, another plane has arrived, and no government can operate in that way. That just the plane landed at the airport with vaccine. There's no planning taking place from national government. There's no information coming through. I just happened to see it by chance on somebody's tweet. Somebody took a picture of a plane landing at the airport, yet provincial health MECs don't even know about it. So I can understand where you're coming from. I think the residents of this province just wants to know when, how, and when should we expect this vaccine to be purchased. On the project side, Chairperson, my third question or third line would be on the project side, which the Minister announced, and also linked to the Premier's infrastructure announcement 2 weeks back. If we can just share more details, will that be specifically under public works and transport? Should we get to them? Or is that something Treasury is going to coordinate from their side? Sorry, Chair, how much time have we got? Okay. And then under load shedding, and I think yesterday we heard from, sadly, the terrible news from Eskom that we're in for the long haul for the last 5 years now. likely to have more and more load shedding, probably more frequently over the next 5 years. And what is the latest from economic and development perspective, Minister, perhaps from your perspective, on where are we going? What is the province now going to do? And I heard then the great announcement on the 6 municipalities and the city of Cape Town. But what else can we do? Because if we are going to be in that for the next 5 years, and it seems like, we are left on our own as the Western Cape to start dealing with this problem. Is the different departments going to share more details on those programs that you're doing with those 6 municipalities, or can you just enlighten us a bit more further following your announcement? And given the cuts in conditional grant and the net effects of where some of them are, and I mean, we are at a terrible state, and perhaps from a technical perspective, with the equitable share, and I know we raise this every single year, and we raise it at the Financial and Fiscal Commission, and terribly Dr. Plaatjes isn't with us anymore because he understood it fully, and I hope that the new chairperson will also assist us with that. Has there been any technical meeting being held in the last while to understand how we can better the equitable share? Because with the net deallocation, with the net, what I call deallocations to the equitable share, the more allocations with schools, and the children are not going to go to school. There's, you know, the classes are more fuller. Has there been a technical argument or re-look at how they're going to do this? So the money must follow the learner at any case. I know Dr. Plaatjes at the Financial and Fiscal Commission said at one point that national trade, in fact, last year during budget committee in lockdown, that the national departments, so they are looking at it, you know, but it hasn't had, we're not at a stage yet, which is evident based on the deallocations of conditional grants. Has there any changes happened at that stage, or are we still just discussion taking place? Thank you, Chair. I'll leave it at that.
Thank you so much. The virtual hands that have been noted are members Nkondlo, Van der Westhuizen, Dagmar, and Wimby in that order. Thank you. Member Nkondlo, you may go ahead.
No, thank you, Chair, and thank you to the Provincial Minister and the HOD and the team for the information and the presentations. I just wanted to check, in particular from the Minister's speech. I want to understand what informs the comment he made about we do not know details in as far as the rollout, including when the third wave is going to hit. Where does that come from? What does it mean when you say you do not know? Perhaps we've got a much more sitting down arrangement to understand where does that come from. And I'm asking this because I'm making an assumption that the provincial government sits in the national command center where these matters are being debated. And also we've got our own, what we call world-class scientists. It becomes creates an anxiety when at this level we're told we do not know, especially about the third wave, because already people are starting to panic, given that we're the first province to be hit. And there is sufficient studies that have been done even by our own provincial scientists in this regard, especially because also the Premier spoke about a comprehensive response plan already regarding the third wave. So what is it that we do not know? If the Minister can expatiate on that. The second one is that I think I'm covered with some of the issues raised by Member Mackenzie. I might not agree with everything he says, but I think on the budget, the additional budget for the COVID rollout, for me, I'm interested to know what exactly triggered this additional. Is it because there has been some kind of a baseline indication, of the areas that would need such additional funding, as it has already been indicated? And what is the detail? Because already we have been informed that the province had embarked on a provincial or will embark on a provincial procurement to secure, I think in the SOPA it says an adequate supply. Where are we in as far as that process is concerned? I hear now the budget is declared. Where are we? Has those engagements started? What is actually happening in that in that regard? So that's my second question, Chair. And then I appreciate, I think, what the presentation, I think, which was done by the HOD and the team. I see on the transversal response some of the issues which I'm sure will get further detail on those elements that are mentioned there. But I would want to understand, especially on the COE, what is the relationship of this conversation of the COE? Because I think year in and year out, we have been finding as the province us bringing back money in as far as COE from posts that could not be filled and all related matters. Now we've got the current potential risk that the HOD has mentioned, and I'm just trying to understand from my head whether what is the relationship of these, and I'm using a perhaps not a technically correct word, these savings, on COE that we've been having, and the current wage obligations that we may have. Is there any relationship if the team can actually raise that? And then maybe some kind of schooling on the fiscal futures. What exactly is entailed and what work is being done around, this area, interesting with the name of fiscal futures, and is there a consideration, because I think both the Fiscal Commission and the budget office at a national level, one of the issues it has raised is that there has been fiscal leakages, and I'm trying to understand whether is that a part of the fiscal future project that is being considered, and what are those areas? And I'm taking from what HOD raises in the slide on risks, the backlogs on maintenance of infrastructure, because indeed I agree with what is in the slide, that has got a heavy cost, in the future, the aging infrastructure that for over time, and I think communities in particular are paying the price. If you look what happens, during the situation of floods, during the situation that we're seeing now of the housing backlogs. So I'm just trying to understand also what are those issues that are included in the fiscal futures, considering, I think, also the fiscal leakages that has already been there and identified at a national level. I'm not sure in the province, issues like, lack of spending of monies because sometimes we do not have harmonized systems. So I think if you can empower me there. My last question, Chair, is on the infrastructure. I'm trying to understand from what is in the speech of the minister. I take that we may get more information during the Department of Public Works, but I'm trying to understand. The Premier spoke of an infrastructure agency. The minister speaks about, broadening or expanding private sector participation and their involvement in the infrastructure, with considering provincial powers on borrowing and all of that. So maybe once again, explain to me the relationship between these two processes, the infrastructure agency and this work now that is being mentioned also of the preparatory project, infrastructure projects, including what was mentioned of establishing the panel of the infrastructure. Are we seeing parts of this infrastructure agency, and this entity that was declared was pronounced by the Premier, are these endeavors part of that? Because I think as a person who is reading from what was presented and what now from a budget point of view is mentioned, one fails to look at, that continuity and the consistency between what was declared in the Premier speech and what the budget is actually alluding to. So if one can just get clarity in terms of that area. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Member van der Westhuizen.
Thank you, Chair. Chair, I wonder whether it would be possible for slide number 52 of the presentation to be beamed again. It deals with the expenditure first by public entities as at the 31st of December. And it seems to me as if quite a number of our public entities' budgets were not adjusted during the course of the year, or were, they saw very little adjustment. And yet now it seems to me as if the projected under expenditure for some of those entities may be quite significant. And if I look at the almost very last line there, the Western Cape Nature Conservation Board, it seems as if, therefore there are almost 29 million rand, which could have been spent to fill holes in much needed other provincial departments or provincial entities. So my first question, and I think I do have the answer already, but I just would like to get confirmation of this, were any of these entities requested to not spend the money in their budgets so that, for example, we can have some money for rollover, etc. So that is the first one, and there are quite a number of them. And Chair, as you know, I'm chairing agriculture and conservation, so I'm also a bit, well, I'm more than a bit interested in the situation at both the Cape Nature and Casidra, but there are also some others. I think, Chair, you would be interested in particularly the situation with the Western Cape Gambling and Racing Board, and where the liquor authorities' budget has even been increased during the course of the year with the adjusted budget. So that's my first question, just, in terms of those underspending, were there any requests or pressures on entities not to spend what has been allocated to them in their budgets? Then if I could ask that we move on some 2 slides, Chair, to the infrastructure spending as at the 31st of December. Here it is particularly regarding infrastructure. And again, we see that, well, first, can I just ask, I think there may be, if I understood it correctly, a typo in the column. There are 2 columns which says expenditure as at the 30th of September 2019. I think the second last column should probably say expenditure as at the 30th of September 2020. But assuming that, can I just then again ask, in terms of certain of these entities that have already spent the full amount available by the end of December, 100%, does that not constitute a bit of a problem now for them for the last 3 months, in the sense that they don't have money to spend over the last 3 months of this financial year? And then also, Chair, I think there was the one in terms, yeah, let me just stop there first. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you, colleagues. And I just wanted to give a little bit more clarity. Please remember that not only are we dealing with the slides on the 3rd adjustment as well as the main adjustment, but we're also dealing with the performance of the 3rd quarter. So we don't have the performance of the 4th quarter before us, that we will still do as well, because there are 4 quarters and the financial year ends now in March. So the performance we'll see before us is of the 3rd quarter ending December. So please just keep that in mind with the respective questions. But the next person that I noted previously was Member Dugmore. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chairperson. Thanks also to the MEC and the department for the presentation. In the HOD's input, there was reference to demographic shifts in the Western Cape, and it's clear that the increase in the population of the Western Cape has also then resulted in a shift, a positive shift in regard to the equitable share allocation to the province. And yet we see, and this doesn't appear to have been identified as a risk at all by the Provincial Treasury, the fact that as we speak, over 6,000 learners still do not have accommodation. So although there's an indication as to what will be spent on education infrastructure, I wonder if the Treasury concedes that it was an oversight, or possibly it isn't seen as a priority that there needs to be a dedicated and specific focus on infrastructure in education, specifically to deal with the backlog, because clearly, as has been indicated, additional funds have been coming to the province given the increase in our population. And I am concerned that that is not identified as a specific issue. I mean, I'm sure that if any of the MECs, MPs or MPLs or officials of this administration still had children not at school at this time of the year, one just wonders why this stark fact is not seen, and given that this impacts historically on working class, poor and mainly black communities. So I just want to check that in the recovery plan, in all the plans, has the issue of space in our schools not been raised as a priority? And secondly, I'll, for instance, give you the example that in a high school in Mossel Bay, a high school called Indwe, the department has simply asked that school to take whichever learners apply. They have now got 400 learners in grade 8, no additional classrooms, and secondly, no growth posts have been allocated. So what my argument is basically that if we are seeing a more favorable allocation in terms of demographic shifts, why are we not seeing the actual prioritization of spending to deal with a critical component for the success of our province, which is the education of its children? Because, for instance, in the recovery plan, there's mention there of 35 billion as part of the recovery plan, but clearly all that amounts to is just taking all the expenditure for education and ECD and simply saying this is a recovery plan. So there's no detail there, for instance, to address a crisis in our province, which is the lack of accommodation for learners. And we also know that there are former Model C schools in sought-after schools in, for instance, communities such as Milnerton, which are quite prepared to accept additional learners if they are given additional accommodation. For instance, Milnerton High is an example of that, but we don't see any specific strategy directed by the Treasury towards meeting those particular needs. I would then also like to ask that there was reference to public participation leading up to the local government elections. What exactly is meant by that? What is a monetary allocation, and what would the form and content be of that form of public participation? And then in regard to the cost of employees, I just want to inquire as to whether the most of the deductions which clearly our province and other provinces are facing are linked to a wage freeze. As far as the province is concerned, has there been no indication about reduction in staff numbers? Is this are these reduced amounts essentially going to be covered by a freeze in current wages and also the not filling vacant posts? I'd like to know more about the 5 million rand that is going to be spent on a COVID-19 contact center. What is this particularly related to? And then I'd like to ask, it seems to me that there's an amount of 75 million that will be allocated towards actual vaccine costs to possibly meet a shortfall of 500,000 elderly. So I'd just like to ask, what is the actual cost per vaccine that is being estimated there? for that 75 million? Has one engaged with particular suppliers, and on the basis of which particular product has that 75 million rand been worked out? And then finally, in regard to the reserves, given the allocations that have been made to meet the various shortfalls which have been explained to us, what is the current status of the provincial reserves as we speak at this point in time? Thank you.
Thank you, Member Dugmore. Member Mvimbi.
Chairperson, can you hear me? Chairperson? Chairperson? Can you hear me, Chairperson?
Member Mvimbi, we can hear you, yes?
Oh, okay.
Can you hear us?
No, it's because you were not responding now. Okay. I can hear
No
you.
problem. I'll just also ask that if anyone else has their virtual mic on, if they can just put it off so that we can hear Member Mvimbi clearly as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chairperson, and thank you very much to the Minister for the budget speech as well as the presentation from the department as well. Thank you very much for that. I think I've got about maybe 3 or 4 questions really I want to pose, also maybe by way of comment. Maybe also this can be answered by the Minister. Obviously, in this presenting of the budget, Honorable Minister, you speak a lot about the recovery, but does this recovery plan also address the issue of restructuring the economy of the Western Cape? Because we have seen that with this problem of the pandemic, it's not actually big business that has come to the rescue. It has actually ended up being the government that must actually come to the rescue and assist. If it's not provincial government, it has been local government, even national government. So it really begins to talk to the need for us as a government in the form of political economy to begin to really intervene in the restructuring of the economy of the province. Maybe if this recovery plan, is it really going to talk to the issue of restructuring or reconstruction of the economy? But on the other hand, Honorable Minister, also while talking about the restructuring of the economy, I think the issue of addressing the plight and challenges of small businesses is very key. But I know that you have mentioned in your speech, but I tried to look for the phrase that you have mentioned on small businesses. I could not see on the speech, but I did mark it down where you said that small businesses will be the supplier of provincial government. Now, in that instance, but then I think when I look into the speech, I could not find that. Maybe was that just maybe not on the speech, but also maybe it might be good if you may just illustrate in what way really is the provincial government going to make sure that small businesses are going to take part in the recovery plan, in the economic recovery plan of the provincial government. The third issue, Honorable, is whilst you spoke about the infrastructure and infrastructure recovery and infrastructure development, but I think there was a slide that was put on infrastructure. That slide seems to talk more to maintenance most of the time. There is actually nothing major that is structural, that is about infrastructure development. In this plan, in your recovery plan, are there major infrastructure development project that we have in store, rather than because the slide that we presented was just more about infrastructure, mostly maintenance, rather than actually. I think the second last question, Minister, I think when you spoke also on the issue of the reserves, you said there's going to be 250, then there's 350 million and 432 million. Now, then on the presentation that was made by the department, I think there is a 2.1 billion that is meant of reserves. Maybe if we can just get a balance, I'm sure maybe the department as well can also assist there as which one is which really of these reserves, because we've mentioned 1.03 billion on reserves, but then on the presentation by the department, maybe the department can clarify that further. There was a mention of 2.1 billion, and I just want to check also, is the 800 million that is also mentioned also coming from the reserves as well? Lastly, I think in your speech, Minister, you've also mentioned the issue of fighting corruption, which is I think is a very plausible issue. But you seem to be only fighting corruption at local government level. Does that mean maybe there is no corruption at provincial level? If there is, what are the plans? Will that, because you seem to be saying that we are going to only empowering the forensic to deal with issues of local government. Does that mean that provincial government is excluded from that, or is this something that is really earmarked for local government? Thank you very much, Chairperson.
Thank you. Members, I do see that there are other hands on the virtual platform, but given that it was 3 presentations and quite a bit of questions, I'm to first allow for answers, noting that some of the questions also overlap with each other. So please try and attempt when you're answering to perhaps try to address some of the similar or same topics together. And then what I'll do is I'll take a second round. But in the meantime, members, those who have asked questions, can you just lower your hands so that when the next round of questions come, I can also distinguish between the old hands and the new hands. Thank you so much. Minister and HOD, I hand over to you for allocation of questions and answers.
Thank you, Chairperson. I will try and deal with some of the questions and then hand over to the department to supplement my replies.
Members online, I'm not sure if someone is busy renovating a kitchen in the background, but if we can just maybe put off all of our mics, then we're able to hear the Minister clearly in his answers. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Chairperson. Let me start with the Honourable Cameron Dugmore. The issue which he raised, of course, is a concern, but I think it's important to emphasize that the Provincial Treasury has, as I indicated in the speech, leaned in to protect the baseline of the Department of Education to the tune of 4.33 billion rand over the medium term, and in fact, if he recalls correctly, allocated an additional 192, I think, 0.5 million rand for infrastructure during the medium term budget policy statement. But certainly the issue which he raised is a concern, but and certainly he will have an opportunity during the various deliberations on budget votes to dig into that problem with the Department of Education. The Honourable Nomin Kondlo raises a question about the third wave and my statement in the speech, which is the view of the Department of Health. And what I was indicating was that there is simply, from a modelling point of view, very significant uncertainty in the environment, which makes it difficult for the Department of Health to, as it were, forecast or predict exactly, first of all, when the third wave will strike, where it will strike. Will it be localized, for example, in a district or in a number of districts, or will it be province-wide? And then, of course, given what we know about how the virus mutates and all the uncertainties surrounding that, exactly what the magnitude of the third wave would be. But this is very much the view of the Department of Health. And again, I would say that I would request the member to perhaps dig into this again during the deliberations on the Department of Health's vote. There were also several questions about vaccine procurement, which was traversed by the department. But I do think it's important to say that the vaccine procurement is, of course, led by the Department of Health. And so when it comes to questions about exactly where we are, again, I think that those questions should be put to the Department of Health. There was then also a question on load shedding. And yes, in my speech, I showcased and pointed to our new program, the Municipal Energy Resilience Program, and how we were going to fund it over 3 years. But of course, the honourable member will know, on the one hand, this builds on work already being done as part of the energy game changer in various departments, which of course includes sort of building small-scale embedded generation, looking at alternative sources of energy like liquefied national gas, and then working particularly with big users on load curtailment programs. But there are other programs being run in other departments. The Department of Education, Department of Agriculture, I beg your pardon, comes to mind, who in this budget are pioneering some very interesting work on battery storage, which the honourable member again might want to dig into when we traverse the Department of Agriculture's vote. Then the honourable Mvimbi asked a range of questions. The first question really was around restructuring the economy and what appeared to be sort of more state intervention. I've got to be frank with the honourable member, is that we are taking the opposite view. We are talking about the ease of doing business and actually reducing the role of the state in the economy, with dealing with some quite serious constraints to economic growth. As regards small business, the small business is, of course, as the honourable member knows, because we've discussed this in previous sessions, a key part of our recovery, and we've allocated significant resources, and I talked about this at length in the previous budget, the medium-term budget statement about our COVID-19 relief fund, where we've been able to assist many small businesses and keep them standing. I did refer to the small businesses and suppliers in relation to the new and innovative e-procurement solution, which the department may want to pick up. There were also questions about the provincial reserves and whether the 800 million was part of the reserves. Yes. I mean, I pointed out in the speech that, again, there is significant uncertainty in the environment. And because of that, we have ring-fenced 800 million rand to which would be available for a range of needs to absorb various cross pressures when it comes to dealing with the fight against COVID-19. There was also a question, if I recall correctly, on corruption. I mentioned my view on corruption in the local government space, but of course, I mean, we are concerned about corruption and maladministration across spheres of government, and it's precisely for that reason that we have implemented our procurement disclosure report, and it's also precisely why there are forensic investigation services warehoused also in the office of the Premier that would deal with allegations in relation to provincial government. But I do wish to assure the member that we will act, we are concerned and will act on any allegations of corruption, whether those allegations relate to the provincial government or indeed municipal government in the Western Cape. Chairperson, if I could then hand over to the department to supplement my replies.
Thank you, Chairperson. Thank you, Minister. Yes, I think the Minister dealt with a number of the questions, so I tried to keep a running tally so that I don't waste too much time, and I will turn to my colleagues, with your permission, Chair, to deal with some of the questions. The Honourable Mackenzie asked the question of whether we have specific guidelines for the missing middle or the new poor as the Treasury. Quite simply, the answer is we don't as the Treasury, but as the provincial government, there has been an integrated work group with the Department of Social Development, Department of the Premier, and particularly the Centre for E-Innovation in trying to better understand the location, the nature of vulnerability that families are facing now, and the extent to which they are being missed by social safety nets that are available across government. Alongside that, there's an enormous amount of work that's being done in the non-government sector as well. And ultimately, it's the family that counts, not that everyone arrives at the door at the same time, but that that vulnerable family is given the assistance that they need. So it's quite a complex environment. I think it would be best to get the specifics of the answer from the Department of Social Development, but just to note that there is I think, a very important ICT angle to this as well, where there have been some innovative work. I'll ask my colleague, Dr. Haverman, to respond on the various questions on the vaccine side. But I think the Minister had emphasized that the Department of Health is the procuring authority. The Provincial Treasury is an enabler, and in this case, in order to enter the procurement process, one needs to have resources available to do that. I mean, that's a sort of rule that we're pretty firm on. You can't go and procure things you have no money for. And so that this budget solves that part of the problem. There are other aspects of health regulatory compliance and, of course, standard supply chain management compliance issues and their various market dynamics and so forth. So our enabling engagements with the Department of Health are around how we traverse this rapidly changing terrain. Members will know that it wasn't so long ago everyone was focused on AstraZeneca. That's how quickly things change in this environment, and obviously we do coordinate with national on that. But I'll leave Dr. Haverman to talk in a little bit more detail. And the question on the infrastructure side of the issues, it's a lengthy discussion all on its own. Of course, there's a clear value chain relationship between the preparation of infrastructure projects, the financing of that project or the portfolio of projects, depending on the financing instruments that you're using, and the delivery of those projects, which is then wrapped up to the ownership of the asset and what one does with the asset over the longer term. So there's a full life cycle value chain that you need to consider in infrastructure management. There are a range of activities that are underway in the province to tighten up our management of the portfolio as a whole. One of that we've drawn attention to in this budget is around dedicated project preparation financing, because this is often underinvested in and it leads to delays in project preparation readiness for implementation. But there is further work that is underway at an investigatory level on the nature of an infrastructure agency. Now, should this be a delivery agency? Should it be a financing vehicle? Or should it be both? And we're drawing on, these are complicated questions, and we're going to be drawing on some external expertise to help advise on these issues in terms of the best outcome for the province with the varying parts of the system that we need to balance. There is some discussion on this in the overview of provincial and municipal infrastructure investment, the third document, particularly on pages 12 to 16. Which hopefully will give members a little bit more detail on it. Project preparation, I think just to go to, I think Honourable Mackenzie's one question there is a function of the project owner, but we need to enable them to have the resources to invest in that project preparation, which is a function of the Treasury. So there's obviously a complementarity from portfolio management to the project management side, but they're distinct roles in the system there. The funding for preparation will therefore ultimately find its way onto the vote of the department. I think the minister has. You'd also, Honourable Mackenzie, asked the question of the PES formula review, and I think we discuss this every time we meet with the committee, and quite rightly so, given how significant it is. The formula has been not too reviewed in the not too recent past. It is always subject to ongoing technical review, and in fact, some of the effects of those reviews are still being introduced into the formula because they're phased in. There are updates for population and so forth. At the moment, we're not, as the province, proposing a fundamental overhaul of the criteria and variables that are used in the formula, and I don't believe anyone is at this point. It is, I should point out, a 10-player game. Where we don't want to be in a position where we end up either spending a lot of effort to get the same outcomes as we get now, okay, or getting to a position where we become net losers in this game, either because there are other priorities that are then taken through in a fundamental review. So we actively participate in an ongoing and relatively mature discussion at a technical level around these things within the Technical Committee of Finance, and that's taken to the Budget Council with Minister Mania and obviously the other provincial MECs and the Minister of Finance. The question, Honourable Nkondlo, on compensation of employees, there is a discussion that we've included in the overview of provincial revenue and expenditure, the overview booklet on page 80, that I think would be quite valuable for you in terms of some of the data that you may be looking for on compensation in that respect. It's obviously in the detailed individual votes. There's more detailed data on individual vote compensation issues that I'd point you to. Underspending tends to be a temporal factor. It's a saving that's generated from the time between an employee leaving and a replacement being hired. So it's a function of the churn rate, the dimensions of the churn in the organization, which is inherent to any organization. Wage rates are structural in nature. So, it would be a potentially risky strategy to use temporal savings to finance structural changes in the expenditure profile. But I'm sure Dr. Haverman, who's worked very closely with the team, with the Department of the Premier and with the Government Technical Advisory Services, may want to add further on that point. I was very pleased you asked a question around fiscal futures. I think this budget experience this year has, I think, confirmed to us that we need to get a better, from a provincial treasury perspective, a better over-the-horizon view into the 5 to 10-year environment of scenarios around our fiscal future. That is looking, I think, at a number of issues. It's around expenditure composition. How much are we hoping to spend on infrastructure as a percentage of our budgets going forward? It's about what level of expenditure are we likely to be able to sustain in the province as a whole and across our individual functions. What compensation related outcomes are we likely to see? And inevitably, one has to do this using various assumptions and making judgment calls on likely scenarios going forward. Now, the one scenario that you typically start out with in a modeling exercise of this nature is business as usual. Let's hold everything constant, diminishing resources, stable expenditures. Where will we end up in 10 years? But one can adjust those assumptions, and this is the nature of modeling exercises and precisely what we're aiming to do, so that we can, I think, resource a debate and discussion and ultimately decisions by policymakers, so that we don't fall into the trap of continuing to not contain compensation as hard as we should, and then maybe making an unwitting trade-off against the investment that's required in infrastructure. So it's not an approach that is intended to lead towards setting fiscal rules or targets. That's a slightly separate debate, but it is to resource and show the sensitivity of varying assumptions and scenarios for policymakers when they make their decisions. It is not directly at this point in how we're designing it, looking at the question of spending capacity, and I'm not sure if I heard you correctly, Member Nkondlo, fiscal leakages, which would be institutional variables. They would be looking at efficiency factors. So it wouldn't necessarily be isolating that as a particular assumption. It wasn't in our original design to do that, because in any modeling exercise, any projection in the future, you want to make visible a limited set of assumptions to test their sensitivities. I will ask my colleague Annelies Pick to deal with Honourable van der Westhuizen's questions on Q3 spending. Just to note that I think that was an error on our part in the presentation. Thank you for picking that up. It's amazing how many eyes can traverse something and then there's still one thing that slips through. I'll ask my colleague Annelies to address that. Honourable Dugmore, I think the Minister had addressed your question around education, infrastructure. There's been significant smoothing in terms of the preliminary allocations, as he mentioned. There are significant investments in education infrastructure that are ongoing. The Provincial Treasury does not either underplay the pressure that the Department of Education is under, and I think you'll find a relatively extensive and special discussion on that pressure in these budget documents on page 51. So I don't think that would support any allegation that we ignore those pressures at all. In fact, we responded to them early and decisively in the preliminary allocation process around the MTBPS because we knew that we had to avoid a trade-off with the pandemic response and with our health platform. There is furthermore, I think, significant additional information on the infrastructure side, in particular in the overview of provincial and municipal infrastructure investment from page 40, and then again in the tables from page 153 to 156, down to a facility level. Obviously, as a Provincial Treasury, we do not select the facilities. That would be something to follow up with the Department of Education, and they have a dedicated infrastructure team in that respect. But I don't think we at all underplay the pressure that the education sector is under, and how that pressure manifests as it is at the moment when there is a growth in demand. On the question of public participation, there is a discussion in that's to the Department of Local Government, which is vote 14. It's largely to support the ward committees, activities around the ward committee process. If you look at the estimates of provincial revenue and expenditure on page 767, you'll find a discussion discussion on that. You asked a question on COE that I think my colleague Dr. Haverman will come back to. At the moment, this is just a freeze, but that's not true in the outer year. It's not true in year 3 of this medium-term framework, which is why we're saying we need to really strengthen the compensation management strategy going forward as well, because while that choice is not immediate, it is sitting in this medium-term expenditure framework. I think on the reserves, I would just point to table 1 in the estimates of provincial revenue and expenditure, the thick book. That's a very useful table. And I will ask my colleague Annalise Pick to speak to that question. And then finally, I think Honourable Mvimbi, on the question of corruption at the provincial level, yes, a lot of the support to the oversight and what we call the combined assurance function is already embedded in the baseline, and those systems are operating and continuing to surveil. My colleague, Ms. Gantana, is critical to that whole endeavor and can talk at some length around our combined assurance framework in the province and the respective roles and responsibilities of the different players in that respect. But there's absolutely no way we countenance corruption at all in the province, and we act immediately. We become aware of any issues at a corporate level. Let me then hand over to first Dr. Haverman, then Ms. Pick, and then Ms. Gantana.
Thank you very much, HOD. Yes, I think we could present for hours on the vaccination program. It's been the subject of a lot of work between us and the Department of Health. Just to take the members to page 45 of this overview of provincial revenue and expenditure, where we've sort of tried to explain in a little bit more detail, I think, some of the stuff I just touched on in the presentation, where at the bottom of page 45, we talk about the risks. The first risk being that the amount allocated to the provinces for the I can never say this word, of the vaccination program will be insufficient. And there I just want to re-highlight that the national government allocated us 156 million, but that we think that the costs associated with responding with the vaccination program are probably going to be significantly more. And there we put 150 million. And then we talk on the following page around the second risk, which is that there will be insufficient vaccines to meet the demand in the province. And then that talks to the fact that there might be shortfalls in the availability of the vaccines. And then below that is another box which goes into a little bit more detail about all the things that have to be taken into account when thinking through trying to cost this vaccination acquisition strategy, which we call a contingency vaccine acquisition strategy. As the HOD said, we have to make sure that if we do any acquisition, we need to make sure that there is money available for it. And the Department of Health is leading on that. And there we put down in those bullets all the different combination of things that in the modeling that we looked at, the efficacy and availability of 2-dose versus 1-dose vaccines. I mean, quite importantly, right in the middle of the budget process, there was this sudden problem with the AstraZeneca vaccine, and obviously the efficacy against the South African variant, what they call, and suddenly everything changed. It was actually quite a good news story from a financial perspective, because it's a one-shot vaccine is always going to be cheaper than a two-shot vaccine, because obviously, you need 2 syringes, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So financially, it was probably quite good news for us, but it did change our projections quite significantly. Obviously, there's big issues around the estimates of the eligible population in each phase, particularly trying to identify who has comorbidities. So the Department of Health does have a lot of information on individuals. They have estimates of how many people have diabetes and how many people are obese and so forth and so forth. And so who would qualify to be, but we don't actually have an absolutely correct number. So we have a range of different estimates on that. Obviously, the exchange rate has gone up and down since all of this has been happening. There are storage and transport costs. and these vary quite significantly by the type of vaccine. We all know there's that one vaccine that needs minus 70 degrees Celsius, and there's other vaccines that don't. It turns out even the minus 70 degrees Celsius vaccines, what you can do is you can put it in a little vial that can keep it cold for long enough that you can actually deliver it. But then it's got a very short expiry date. Some of the other vaccines also have expiry date issues, as we know. And then there are regulatory framework issues that, obviously the regulatory authorities both in South Africa and around the world are looking at all the different studies. So these are all the sorts of things that we took into account in determining the amount that we wanted to allocate in the end. And this is very much a preliminary amount. We will continue to look at all the different details of that. Then on the compensation story, I think that was the big issue in the M2PS. I think it's important to highlight that, yes, the direct question is, do our numbers take into account a wage freeze? And the answer is yes. The national government strategy is to freeze wages for all employees, which obviously includes all provincial employees. Their strategy also includes implicitly a freeze of the number of employees over the MTEF. This is quite a concern to us because it may well be that some departments, for whatever reason, do naturally need to increase employees, particularly, I think, a question raised by Honourable Dugmore about the fact that provincial population is growing. And so we've had to find resources because the national strategy is obviously that we won't necessarily be allowed to add additional resources in that area, but I think it's quite important that we do. And then I think there's a related question about the spatial distribution of infrastructure investment, and there's quite a lot of information, I think, contained in the overview of provincial municipal infrastructure investment document, which talks a little bit to how much money is being spent in education, in health, and in transport and public works, but particularly on education in the different municipalities around the province. I think those were my questions. I think it's Annelies on reserves next.
Thanks. I think just ask Annelies Pick to come in on the Q3 issues and then on the reserves.
Thank you, Chair. I will start off on the reserves. And so when we look at the reserves, slide 21 of the presentation indicated in terms of what the total reserves ended up in terms of being. So I'll give the breakdown, but the information that I'm also reading from is indicated, as the HOD has indicated, is table 1 on the EPRE. So for the first year of the MTF, the reserves amount to 1.251 billion rand, and that 1.251 billion rand is made up of unforeseen and unavoidable of 250 million rand. The fiscal transition support facility reserve is 105 million rand. The COVID response reserve, as indicated in the presentation, 800 million rand. There's an acquisition of property reserve, that's an annual reserve that we have for transport and public works for the purchasing of property, mainly for education and health, to the value of 55 million rand. We also indicated that the social distress reserve for 25 million rand is also indicated in the presentation. And then lastly, the project preparation facility reserve, the remaining 14.9 million, makes up the 1.25 billion rand. In the third year of the MTF, the reserve amounts to 419 million rand. That consists of unforeseen and unavoidable of 350 million rand, the annual acquisition property reserve of 58 million rand, and then the project preparation facility reserve, which is also an annual amount of 11 million rand. Then lastly, for the MTF, the 432 million rand for the reserve, apologies, the 523 million rand for the reserve consists of unforeseen and unavoidable, 432 million rand,
the acquisition property reserve of 60 million rand, and 30 million rand for the project preparation facility. As I indicated, Chair, in the presentation, the reserves that the committee would have seen in the previous MTEF, we have drawn down on those reserves. And as in the minister's speech is indicated, when we leaned in for education, that 4.3 billion rand mainly came from those reserves that we previously indicated from there, and then also to assist in terms of the Department of Health. So that is why the reserves now in the end find themselves at 1.2 billion, 419 million, and 523 million over the MTF. I'll now go on to the Q3 in a question on the public entities. And so, as indicated by the chairperson, we just need to keep in mind the Q3 is a projection as at the 30th of December. So as at the end of 30th December, the public entities were projecting in terms of what possibility there is in terms of underspending. When we made the request to departments in terms of voluntary surrender, we did not indicate that public entities could not participate in terms of the voluntary surrender of funding. But when it comes to public entities, we also need to understand that at this stage, with the impact of COVID-19, there is in terms of the factor of, in terms of risk appetite that public entities needed to take into consideration. What I mean by that is the fact that our public entities, and for example, Cape Nature, receives funding from other sources besides funding from the provincial government. And so, and they've also in terms of, they collect their own revenue in terms of the various facilities that they have. So at this stage, what both public entities and the the accounting officers of departments had to do was take the risk appetite into consideration in terms of what would that revenue outcome look like, and if there is any shortfall of revenue in terms of by the end of the financial year, that would need to be offset by an underspending on expenditure in order to balance both the books and from an accounting perspective, but also from a budget perspective. So at this stage, yes, essentially public entities, due to risk appetite, did not take up the offer of voluntary surrender. Then also part of the underspending, as indicated, if it is in terms of infrastructure, for example, in terms of Cape Nature, and then in terms of that underspending, would then also see almost an automatically a rollover for the next financial year. But as I indicated, it needs to be offset against the projections of revenue. That also then deals not only for Cape Nature, but also in terms of from Westgrow and as well as Casidra, because not all the funding that they do receive comes from the provincial revenue fund through the departments. So that answers in terms of the public entities. My colleague, Mr. Langenhoven, will then look at the answer to infrastructure regarding Q3.
Good afternoon, Honourable Chair. Just on the infrastructure, there were a few particular questions. The numbers on the slide is correct, and as the HOD indicated, the apologies for the heading that is incorrect. And then so that's all December or third quarter numbers for both 2019 and for 2020. Then there was also a concern about the 100% expenditure for two departments, the one human settlements, as indicated in the third adjustments budget. They will get additional funding to the tune of 220.8 million for human settlements to assist with two particular issues, which was indicated. And then in the case of social development, it's really a small amount of money, and they managed to spend it already early in the, not early in the year, but by the third quarter. So that's also not as commitments to ECD centers. So that's also not a real issue for them. So they managed to spend their budget by end of December. That was good. And then just in the terms of the education and the specific question around additional funding potentially for them, as the minister indicated, 192.5 million was allocated in the second adjustments budget to assist with maintenance pressures and also security measures, particularly fencing, to assist them, because we, as part of the economic recovery plan, but also there was a bit of scope to assist them. But the overall budget varies between 1.8 and 1.9 billion over the for infrastructure for them, which is, I mean, it will never be enough, but it is a lot of money, and they have to prioritize within that allocation. And maintenance, as you will see, is a high priority. The old schools and to strike a balance between new accommodation and maintenance is a very challenging one indeed, not only for them, but all departments. Then there was a specific question on major projects, new projects envisaged for the NTF period. I think it's worthwhile to mention that was also indicated in the National Treasury documentation that we've got funding. It's for preparation at this stage. I mean, as you will know, there's quite a lot of funding and time that goes into preparation of two hospitals in particular. The one is the Klipfontein, the regional hospital, where the old GF Jooste Hospital used to be, or the site that's opposite that. And then there's also for the regional Tygerberg Regional Hospital in Bella. So we got funding from that. So the planning will start in all earnest on those two projects. And then in the case of roads, the Department of Transport and Public Works in particular, the extension of the R300, which is a major link that is still missing in the system, will receive quite a bit of attention during the MTF period, as well as the N1, N7 interchange, to mention a few of the major capital projects. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, team. Let me just ask Ms. Gantana if she wanted to add anything on the corruption and combined assurance issues. Sorry, and e-procurement. Apparently there was a question there.
With the combined assurance, and say that we're working with the Department of the Premier on this particular issue. And when it comes to combined assurance, there's different levels. So we're not saying that there is, I think at this stage, our audit outcome speaks for itself. But be that as it may, there is a number of layers when it comes to combined assurance. Firstly, both internal assurance as well as with the independent assurance providers. So starting with the management assurance in terms of the accounting officer system, just to ensure that internally within the department, there's adherence to that. Then also in terms of the internal control units that we actually a couple of years ago, we provided specific funding for that to just ensure that provincial departments are adequately resourced in order to give effect to that. And then also internally is also the work that we do from a PT point of, from a provincial treasury perspective, and just in supporting departments when it comes to assurance functions. Independent is obviously our internal control, our internal audit units, which is located within the Department of the Premier, and then also the AXA, which will then provide. So it's a combination of all of these that we are comfortably saying that we have got sufficient levers in place to ensure that we do provide, or at least make sure that we run a clean government, and that our governance frameworks are in place and adhered to. So that is the issue around combined assurance. I think we have done a presentation to the audit committee not so long ago on the specific issue. It was done with together PT, together with the Department of the Premier, and if there's any need for us to also perhaps make that available to this committee, then we can certainly arrange for that also to happen. Then just in terms of the procurement strategy, and so our broader strategy has not changed. Our strategy is still focused on governance, capacitation and development, as well as strategic procurement and technology. And within that broader strategy, we have key focus areas. And I think also maybe to respond to Member Mvimba's question, the detail of that is in the OPRE on specifically Chapter 3, where we actually provide further information on the broader strategy. And one of those is the e-procurement strategy that we or technology enablement that we are actively pursuing. We started in the last financial year, and we have every intention also to continue with that project. It is in a way also trying to assist with some of the gaps that we see our current BAS system provides, as we want to migrate to IFMS, and the e-procurement solution find itself as a way to bridge the gap. But it is looking at continuous improving in terms of making sure that we're getting value for money in purchasing, in providing suppliers with a convenient and effective medium to do business with government. Just in terms of the further detail as it relates to the SMME issue. So one of the initiatives also as part of the, in addition to the e-procurement solution, is also the reduction of red tape, and that obviously we are working with the National Treasury. It does not specifically as it relates to SMMEs. So we want these suppliers to still be compliant and to deliver quality goods and also adhere to health and safety standards. But we do see that there is an opportunity that for us to engage with the National Treasury as well as the DTIC to look at how we can support SMMEs just in terms of the reduction in terms of red tape. So there's a whole lot of initiatives that support the broader SEM strategy that we are driving from a PT perspective.
Thanks, Chair. I think that's the first round.
Thank you. Colleagues, I'm going to ask that for the second round that we just keep our questions please brief, as we still need to deal with committee business after that as well. I do see Honourable Brinkhuis's hand, so I'll start with you. Honourable Brinkhuis, are you there?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, thank you very much, Honourable Chair. First of all, we want to say thank you for the presentation from the department and the budget speech also from the minister. And we want to welcome the presentation and say a big thank you to the department for again indicating to the city and to the Cape Town Metro 50 billion rand budget. We want to say thank you again to the department for allocating that amount of money to the city, into the Cape Town, greater Cape Town area. And in the same breath, we want to say that this is actually the area that has the greatest inequality in the Western Cape and in South Africa. And we just want to ask from the minister that if he can give us the guarantee going forward when this money is spent, that inequality, if he can give us the guarantee that we can in the foreseen future see the end of inequality in this region of the Western Cape. And if we go onto the ground and we see the reality on the ground and we see certain areas of this region of the Western Cape, it has a lot of privileges that other areas doesn't have. I don't want to specify now. So in short, my question is to the minister, if he can give us the guarantee that this budget can in the foreseen future create an end to the inequality existing here. Thank you very much, Honorable Chair.
Thank you. Honorable Dugmore.
Thank you very much, Chairperson, and thanks to the department and the MEC for the previous replies. I think just on the issue of the provincial equitable share allocation beginning to take into account greater numbers, the reason I'm raising the issue is that, you know, to simply say one has to look at the infrastructure spending which the education department is undertaking, I don't think deals with the issue I'm actually raising, because if the PES is beginning to increase given our population, then I think it requires a fundamental relook at what the main departments, education and health, are actually getting, because when one doesn't take that into account, it impacts on issue of growth posts because you've got greater numbers, and then it also impacts on the issue of infrastructure. So I think obviously we will need to study those detailed budgets more in the context of comparing, and possibly you could answer this question: what has the increase been in the provincial equitable share been from the previous year, based on the point that was raised in the HOD's presentation on demographic shifts? Because then I think we have to look at prioritization of the provincial budget itself. Secondly, you mentioned that there would be some public employment. I'd like to ask what is the nature of that public employment? And then specifically to the MEC, later on this year, we will be getting the PERO as well as the MERO. And what we find in all these presentations is an absolute aversion to looking at issues of broad-based Black economic empowerment in regard to procurement, issues of ownership, because the PERO and the MERO at the moment, when they analyze a sector of the economy, they in no way reflect on the economic ownership and participation in that sector of the economy. So I'd like to ask the MEC, in this year's MERO and PERO, is he going to request that those that do these important documents for us will actually attach a lens in regard to the racial composition of the ownership of the different economic sectors of this province? Because for as long as we ignore race as a determinant of disadvantage, we are actually not going to be able to come with the measures which will specifically focus on those inequalities which have their legacy in colonialism and the way this apartheid economy has been structured. Thanks.
Thank you, Honorable Nkondlo, and then after you, I'll just throw in 2 extra questions from my side as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the responses in my earlier questions. 3 short ones, Chair. I just want to know, how is this budget, Minister, addressing the issue of inequality, including the issue of inclusive economic growth. And I'm raising this because when the Premier, together with yourself, speak about a private sector-led approach to rid the burden, the state, I think in a market economy that is understood. But I think there is one, economic issue that is well known, well written about the market failures. And that is why the state will then have to come chip in and ensure, a fair distribution of the economic opportunities and the likes. And I think the Western Cape economic sectors are not immune if one considers what the Competition Commission market inquiry has done. So I'm asking specifically this question about how is this budget, addressing inequality and the market stewedness, wherein if you talk about the green economy and others, in terms of participation, you already see the struggling of SMMEs, and some of those vulnerable groups, including local economies. The second one, Chairperson, is in the performance report. I just wanted to check in the changes that were made in the in-year performance indicators, what would have been the formula used in making or in deciding which performance indicators can actually be changed, and the extent to which those changes would have affected personnel or service delivery issues. The last one, this conversation, I know is not a new one. I think this matter has been raised in previous meetings. This notion of partially versus not achieved or achieved, because my sense that I'm gathering, and if I'm incorrect, please explain that. My sense is that partially achieved is then counted as part of the achieved. And it becomes actually confusing for one, to say at what point where do you draw the line between a partial achievement, whether it is an achievement or it is not an achievement, so that we do not get a situation where, departments get to create a picture of themselves having achieved, because you count both the percentage of the achieved and also the partially achieved. So I want a clarity in that regard, because I think if one looks at that the bar graph, which has got, I think, especially the entities, one can see the Saldanha IDZ has got partially achieved, I think, which is demonstrated there in yellow, which goes above, I think, that ceiling of 80%. Now, I do not understand what that means, because if you're saying it partially achieved its indicators almost about more than 80%, can you then say it has achieved in terms of the qualification that is given to these particular interpretations? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Member Nkondlo. What I'll do is I'm going to pose my questions, but I'll request that mine just put in writing then, because we are going to run out of time if I add those as bigger formal ones for answering. I just wanted to give some feedback from the 2020 budget. Now, in my constituency, so I'm standing up because the mic is on that side, my constituency is Laingsburg Municipality. And so I took the 2020 budget, and I first went and delivered hard copies at Cope Produce Center, where many businesses go buy infrastructure type of equipment for the stuff on the farm, and also for the little smaller businesses. And I delivered it there, and I posted on the WhatsApp to say, please go fetch your budget. That was the first part. The second part is I went to then go look at what specifically was allocated to Laingsburg. And I just want to give feedback that the clinic is coming on very nicely. I don't know when it's going to be launched officially, but it looks very nice. I also went to go look at the new informal trading center, which received money from DDAT last year, and the building is done. I know there are a few small and yana things that they are still busy with there, but the informal traders that are there, I spoke to them. We created a little WhatsApp group for ideas and any concerns if they ever need to speak to me or anything. But they really appreciate what that building means, because it's not just informal trading within the building that you're now trading from. Is the fact that when a building gets built, that money is is spent in that area and in that district to assist with job creation. And I also received feedback from one of the business chambers that is the chair of the Laingsburg Black Business Forum that deals specifically with construction, saying that the money that was allocated for construction, health and safety training is much appreciated, and they look forward to that Department of Transport and Public Works bringing that training also specifically closer to Laingsburg, because often it's in the big districts. So from the 2020 budget feedback from my constituency, this is the feedback that I'm getting from my constituency, and I just want to say thank you for that. Regarding the provincial equitable share formula, you mentioned that new data has been included into that formula. We haven't had, this is our first budget meeting obviously for the year with the budget, so we haven't really had National Treasury before us. But if between yourselves and National Treasury, you can just forward us the new inputs into the formula, and if province has made any new suggestions in terms of that formula, if we could also just be alerted to those proposals that have been made. And then there was just an indication that the presentation Ms. Quintana was talking about can be forwarded to us, if that would be possible. Let me just see here quickly. Yes, thank you so much. Those are all of my particulars. But Minister and HOD, I will allow for you to allocate accordingly. If we can just keep the answers as brief as possible, just so that we can attempt to conclude by the 3 o'clock timeline. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairperson. Once again, I will take a stab and then hand over to the department. To the Honourable Brink case, I think it would be very difficult to give him the assurance that he has asked for, but certainly I think that this budget will make a significant dent in inequality. And I think that our commitment, to mobilizing 100 million rand for particularly short-term employment programs and humanitarian relief for communities in distress at least signals that we are concerned and care about people who are struggling in the Western Cape. In response to the Honourable Cameron Dugmore, if I'm not mistaken, the increase was 1.6 billion, but the department can confirm that. On public employment programs, the 50 million rand, which is allocated to Vote 14, the Department of Local Government, the intention there is to intervene where required and allow municipalities to implement short-term employment programs that will bring relief to distressed communities. I'm also sure that the Honourable Member is aware that the National Minister of Finance made a statement about a further 11 billion rand being made available by national government. I understood it to be over the medium term for public employment programs. And we certainly are going to be in conversation about with National Treasury about those funds, and we are certainly going to explore whether we can leverage and access those funds for further public employment programs for distressed communities in the Western Cape. On the question asked by the Honourable Nomin Kondlo, I think that this budget deals with inequality, and it's baked into the baseline and the big department votes, because we are talking essentially about the transferring of assets. So it's baked into, for example, the Department of Human Settlements, transferring homes to people so that they are assets. The Department of Education providing assets, education assets to people, and the Department of Agriculture, for example, assisting new small-scale farmers. In the last question, in respect of the Mero and Pero, I would like to remind the Honourable Cameron Dugmore that we deal very forthrightly in the Mero and Pero with the whole question of inequality, the Gini coefficient, and the Human Development Index. And certainly the proposals that he makes in respect of the Mero and Pero certainly will take under consideration. Thank you.
Minister, I think you've dealt with most of the questions. So, Chair, I'll just add some more technical detail at the margin here, but obviously and largely as a reader's guide. For Honourable Brinkhorst, it's obviously very difficult to guarantee an outcome, which is where inequality or greater equity lies. But it is what we do attempt to guarantee through our efforts across combined assurance, the budget process, and so forth, is that funding is spent properly and for its intended purpose. That's at the output level. But I think there are other variables, exogenous variables, external variables and influences that will influence whether inequality reduces as a result of that. One of the things that we're seeing as a result of COVID and the broader impacts of the pandemic is an increase in inequality. That's not something government is driving. Okay, it's something we're actively trying to mitigate, to slow the pace of that increase in inequality that's coming from this massive external shock. So it would be inappropriate to guarantee something that's not within our realm to deliver. But what we can guarantee is that we will leave no stone unturned in making sure that funds are spent properly according to the purpose for which they are allocated. For Honourable Dugmore, I think you make a very valuable point in terms of the prioritization of budgets. Whether education in South Africa is underfunded is something that I think needs a deeper discussion, because at a per capita terms in global perspective, that does not appear to be the case. So there is indeed, I think, a question of prioritization within the provincial budget and fiscal transition within the provincial budget towards lower baselines. We do cover some of these issues on page 69 of the overview, the OPRI. And I think it's very much bound up with the question of what else must the province spend money on, and is it spending money on? You know, there's trade-offs that need to be made, and they're very, very difficult trade-offs. You know, is it between a clinic and a library? These are extremely difficult choices that need to be made. Certainly on the Pero and the Mero side, we're always looking to improve the quality and the coverage of that publication. Subnational data, as we've mentioned in the past, is always a challenge. The more granular you get, the harder it is to get reliable data sets without doing primary research, primary level surveys or censuses. And so that's always going to be a constraint for us, but we're very keen and we're looking quite broadly at the sort of data that we can now bring in to the Mero and the Pero. So we very much, going to continue to look at all the dynamics of inequality, growth, and so forth in local economies, because this is critical for municipalities as well. I think I should then, other than thanking the chair for the feedback from Lanesburg, very valuable. This has been a year where we haven't been able to be as much out across the province as the provincial treasury would normally be and we'd like to be. So we haven't seen the progress with our own eyes as much as we would like to. So it's very good to get that feedback. We will certainly follow up on both the points you make on the provincial equitable share and providing the combined assurance presentation. We're delighted that this committee is interested in those issues as well. And then I should just hand over to my colleague, Ms. Zinat Ishmael, on the specifics of the performance indicator questions that were asked by Honourable Nkondlo.
Thank you. I will address the question on the targets and the question related to the criteria for the in-year changes. From the onset of 2020, that was more or less June, July, a DG to DG circular was issued by the Department of Performance Monitoring and Evaluation, and it was about the revision and the retabling of the 2025 the strategic plans and the retabling of the 2021 annual performance plan. Noting at the time when COVID hit the country, it was also at the onset where government departments nationally and provincially just commenced with a 5-year strategic plan. And then when it came to June, July, the realization was that some of these targets would not be achieved. Within that context, there were guidelines given in terms of how we could actually change targets. So in terms of the SPPs, it was mainly related to the outcomes and the indicators. If at that stage your 5-year targets were already affected, and mainly changes in relation to COVID-19 pandemic, which means if the pandemic have actually affected those particular targets. We as a province, we actually made the affected in-year monitoring, as alluded earlier, in November, and the changes, it was particular changes to the APPs, and only strategic plans were necessary, but the changes to the APP were in related to the outputs and the output indicators, and especially the targets. But the criteria was changes as it relates to the COVID-19 pandemic. So what we have done is we have put in place guidelines, and we have communicated with all the departments, and guidelines were sent to the departments in relation to that, to the in-year changes. As indicated, there was also a committee that has been established. The Director General have actually perused all those requests for in-year changes, and this was then a parliamentary decision where we actually reported it to then to Parliament also. So it was a rigorous process and quite a detailed process, so much so that also it's not any indicator that just has been changed. A full report was also then submitted to the Director General. Yeah, so and then in relation to the second question in terms of the targets and partially achieved, correctly so, one want to move away from what we have achieved on a quarterly basis in terms of actually achieved, partially achieved, and none and not achieved, and actually only have the two variances where we actually say we have achieved and we have not achieved. The partially achieved is there actually also as an incentive to actually not just to say just bluntly not achieve, but it's also encouragement to actually assess at that given point in time. So if you haven't achieved, what's the possibility of actually achieving in the next quarter, right? And ultimately, incrementally, how are we going to achieve our targets at our annual targets? So the criteria is then if it's more than 50% that the target has been achieved, so between 50% and less than 100%. So a target could have been partially achieved at 99%, and then that 1% could have disadvantaged a particular department or entity. Hence, we're still encouraging, and we're actually giving that option where department could ask if we have partially achieved, noting that DPME is actually asking us to encourage a reporting where it's actually not partially achieved. but internal arrangements are there with the departments where we actually we want to know that 1% possibility that's there when you actually achieve a target. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Minister and the department, and also our colleagues from the Department of the Premier. Thank you so much. When you look at these documents, you just know we're going to have wonderful bedtime reading for the next week or so. And I just want to thank you for in order the ability to capacitate not only the residents of the Western Cape, but the members in order to do oversight over the projects that are happening within the various constituencies. It's not just about the allocation of the money. It is about going to go see, was the infrastructure project that you said in 2020 built? And for example, the example I made in Linksburg, yes, it was built. And it's those projects that we want to be able to go and do oversight and ensure that the money is used for the people on the ground. And I just thank you for all the late nights you've put in for the budget and for bringing this budget before us, a budget of hope, which I'm sure that all of us will interrogate in the respective budget votes. But thank you so much. We're going to go over to committee business now, so you are excused. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair, for that compliment. Thank you.
Okay, colleagues, we're going to jump straight in while we excuse our colleagues from the virtual and physical chamber. What I'm going to do is I'm first going to go to the minutes of the committee, and then I have some feedback as well that I'll then give after the minutes, and we can then deal with the resolutions at that same stage. Okay, colleagues, let's quickly see if the first minutes are up. Okay. Okay, it's just one set of minutes. Let's go through that quickly. Okay. Members, are there any edits on page 1? Oh, do you have an edit? Okay, our procedural officer says she has an edit. Let's see her quickly.
Chair, Member Branches here.
Yes, Member Branca is yes. I saw that now. Our procedural officer just said that there is actually an edit there by your name. Apologies for that. The procedural officer is including that edit now for us quickly.
Thank you very much, Chair.
No problem. We must always just have our extra eyes.
Indeed, Chair.
Okay, quickly. Wait, just hang on. The comment went away there by the edit. Let's put it. Oh, it is there. Okay. Miss Kluter, okay, Miss Kluter, you know about the edit, I'm assuming, because it just seems that you're using a different font in order to write it in. But essentially must be Member Branca's. Okay, so let's quickly go down to just check the others. Miss Kluter, are you in hospital? And working, okay. Okay, let's quickly go down. Dedication.
Sorry, Chair. But
yes, Member Branca's?
I think the editing is incomplete because my surname is initials is. It must be G.
No problem. Member Miss Kluter, we can just put that in there. Okay, I see that. Okay,
Thank you very much.
No problem. Let's quickly go down to just check the others. Okay. Let's quickly go down. Okay, that's page 1. If no other edits on page 1, let's quickly go to page 2. Member Dugmore, is that a edit? I see your hand.
No, Chair, I'll take it down.
Okay, no problem. Page 2 then. Let's quickly go through the edits. Okay. Let's go down. You go down. Okay, that's page 2. If no edits, we can go to page 3. Okay, if no edits, if I could get a mover for the minutes.
I move to be adopted.
Okay, I see Member McKenzie for that. A seconder for the minutes, please.
I second, Chair.
Thank you, Member Brankhuis. The minutes are then adopted. I'll just quickly now move to the resolutions and actions, where I'm also going to give feedback quickly. Ms. Kluter or Ms. Kamish Ahmad, if we can just quickly put up the money bills document that we received from the Rules Committee and the Speaker's Office, so I can give feedback. So members, while we're putting the document up, this is obviously now our first Budget Committee meeting for the year, which dealt with the budget. And then previously, we were waiting for Rules Committee to indicate to us the processes for money bills and if we can start with our research, etc., etc. We
Let me know if you want me to screen it. Right?
Yes, Ms. Kluter, can you put up the letter? Okay. Ms. Kamish Ahmad says she can put it up. Don't worry about it. She's quickly putting it up for us. Okay. Okay, colleagues. So because we forwarded you a lot of documents, we forwarded you documents about research, about possible options and procedures and how we can go about it. And essentially, Rules Committee has now said, please, Budget Committee, please go ahead, go and do your research, go and come with your process for coming up with this draft bill and so on. And Rules Committee will do their work in terms of ensuring that there's a rule for when we want to bring the substantial matter then. But colleagues, I would like to propose that we get the research department that wrote the research, we get the legal department that did their parts of the documentation, and that we also then invite, for example, Provincial Treasury, National Treasury, for example, the money, not money bills office, Budget Office of Parliament, sorry, they all have these different names, FFC and so on. And then what we do is we have a workshop where we have all of these various entities speak to us on that underlying values and principles that is held in our constitution nationally and provincially that should be taken into account when writing a bill like this, and that we go and unpack the national legislation, because we must remember that parts of our matters must also be in line with national legislation. And then we take 2 or 3 days as a workshop, and we go and workshop all of this information before we start with writing the substantial clauses, for example. And it might be necessary maybe after that workshop that we say that, okay, these things are what we want to do, this is the process we want to follow for drafting and research, and this is how we want to go forward. But that way then, we can all take those 2 or 3 days just to all get onto the same level with the type of information and research that needs to go into a bill like this. So that is my proposal to members. And I would like to ask whether I can then, with the procedural officer, go and find dates then for us to workshop the process and the underlying values and principles for a bill like this. And then at that workshop, we can then decide, okay, this is ABC, what we would like to see going forward.
Chairperson, I think it's a good idea. I would second that.
Okay, I heard Member McKenzie supporting that. Members, I'm going to take more input on this quickly.
Yes, I also support that, Chair. Member Brankhuis, I fully support.
Okay, thank you, Member Brankhuis. I saw a second bubble, but I don't know who was speaking. Oh, Member Vimbi, yes?
Support it.
Support, Chair.
Support
Okay.
it.
Thank you so much. And I also heard Member Philander there. So what I'll then do is I'm going to then liaise with our procedural officer to try and find workshop dates for as early as possible then within the next quarter then for us. Colleagues, that is the only feedback I have from my side. Yes. Members, are there any specific resolutions other than what has already been asked? Going once, going twice. Members, thank you so much then for today. Please remember that the respective votes will now be going to the respective committees. Those respective standing committees will hold their public hearings on the votes on the 17th, 18th, 19th, and 23rd. And then Budget Committee will then consider the reports at a meeting on the 25th of March, as indicated in your program. Thank you so much, members, for your attendance and your robust engagement. The meeting is now officially adjourned. Thank you so much.